Okay, we are on the record.
Booting up. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Happy New Year. This meeting is noticed in the local papers, also posted in the lobby to this building. We are being broadcast live on Channel 34 and stream live on montclair.peg.tv. And we are available on demand at montclairnjusa.org. I'd like to remind you that this is a quasi-judicial proceeding. This evening, we will be making determinations and we will be exercising powers and procedures resembling a court of law. We are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions based on the information that is provided to us, and we are taking official action, and as a result, all of the comments and questions this evening need to be limited to the issues that the board is hearing. And we expect that appropriate decorum that would be appropriate for any judicial hearing will be maintained this evening at all times. Just to give you a little bit of orientation as to how we will proceed, we have two matters on our agenda this evening. We're going to take a short application for a simple determination that we are hoping will be done very quickly. And then we will move on to continue our hearing on Lackawanna Plaza. And with respect to that, I am anticipating that we have one objector witness who will be testifying this evening, and then we will get to public comment. And once we get to that stage, I'll probably talk to you a little bit further about how we'll proceed with the public comment. But for the time being, I think we should move on. I'm not going to repeat anything else with respect to our normal procedure because I don't think that we're going to get to too many questions of witnesses this evening. We're expecting to hear from the public this evening. So without any further ado, we'll move on to the roll call. Janice?
Chair Wynn?
Here.
Vice Chair Brodock?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Councillor Schlager? Here. Miss Willis? Here. Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally?
Here.
Miss Lockman?
Here.
Mr. Barr?
Here.
Mr. Gilmer?
Here.
Okay.
We have some details with respect to our organization that we need to take care of. We have a report from the nominating committee.
Nominating committee would be Councillor Schlager and...
But what about minutes first?
We'll get to the minutes after that.
Okay.
First we have to...
This is number 3. We have to appoint everybody first, and then we get to number 4.
Let's see. As far as the nominating committee, I don't see a list for the secretary and assistant secretary.
I volunteer as secretary.
Okay.
And Graham will volunteer as the assistant secretary.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Then the nominating committee, the chairperson John Wynn, vice chairperson Keith. I will move you to both your positions, Keith Broddick, John Wynn.
Okay, there's a motion by Councillor Schlager. Is there a second? Second. By Ms. Willis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And officially, can you just nominate me as the board secretary and Graham as the assistant secretary?
I will nominate Janice Talley as the secretary and Graham Prado as the assistant secretary.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Well, congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations.
But I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank you both for your dedication to this committee. It's been several years now, and it doesn't go unnoticed, and we thank you on behalf of the council and myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question, though. What about our
employee person that
That's
sits.
the next.
No, that's-
Well, are we going to do that this evening?
No, that's the mayor's appointment. Mayor has not appointed that position as of yet, but he's aware of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We do have, though, our subcommittee appointments, and as well as a board professional appointment. So with the subcommittees,
Are there any,
Engineer.
does anybody want to change their subcommittee appointments from last year? Obviously, when we get a new Class 2 member, they'll be a member of the nominating committee. But other than that, we can keep it the same if you feel that it works.
Motion to continue subcommittee structure as is?
Second by Mr. Ian Wally. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
all right, and then we have a nomination for board engineer to maintain our current board engineer.
Actually, we already did Tom.
Right.
We did that him
Oh,
at the
I'm
last
sorry,
meeting.
the appointment of the new one.
This is the new
Yes.
one, which
Right.
is, the Personnel Subcommittee interviewed
engineers.
7 different firms, as well as representatives from the Zoning Board of Adjustment, and the consensus and the recommendation from the subcommittee is to go with Suburban Consulting Engineers. They felt that the person that they suggested for this, who would be our engineer, was very interested in the job, invested in the job, didn't have a lot of other conflicting municipalities that he'd work with, and we were very impressed. So the recommendation is to go with Suburban Consulting Engineers.
I would also add that out of all the 6 firms that we interviewed, Suburban also not only had engineering experience, but they also had landscape architects on board, surveyors and designers. So they encompass a lot of areas for us, and I thought that was important as well.
So I have a resolution.
Well, I have a question first.
Okay.
Were references provided and checked?
Excuse
Were
me?
references for the engineer provided and checked?
Yeah, well, I checked one of them.
For the one that you're nominating?
Yes.
Okay.
And they came with lots of references. They had a
And they were
fairly
checked
large
as- right.
presentation
Yeah.
that they made. Yeah.
And I have another question. Are travel expenses included in the hourly fee, or is that outside of that?
They pay for, we pay for mileage, or they charge for mileage.
Okay. In addition to their hourly fee?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Do you want to?
Is there a motion?
Make the motion?
Yeah, I move that we follow the recommendation of the committee and appoint Suburban as our engineer for the upcoming year.
A second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And then I have another, we never voted at the last meeting on the position of traffic engineer. At the request of the board, I did reach out and ask them if they could change the price structure. And they did change the proposal for the position of director from $185 an hour to $170 an hour, and for supervising engineer from $165 to $150. So I do think that they were very considerate.
Yep, I think that's very responsive and reasonable.
Yeah.
Thank you to them.
So
for
is there a
doing that.
motion to reappoint NV5 as traffic engineer with this revised proposal?
So, second?
That was Willis? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great. That brings us to the minutes from December 17th. And I know I got comments from Carmel and Keith, and an additional comment from, verbal comment from Steve on changes to the minutes. Steve's was just a minor grammatical change. Are there any other changes to the minutes?
Yes, on page 3, where you said Chair Nguyen asked if the relocation is a detriment. If its placement retains context, Mr. Connolly stated that he cannot answer this question. I believe he did answer it at a later time.
Where on page 3 are you?
Very top.
Okay. As if there is a detriment if its placement retains.
Same with a couple of paragraphs down.
So wait a minute, do you want me to add that he responded? Because this is almost in
Chronological order.
Yeah, chronological order.
Someone might get the impression that the question was never answered.
Okay, so how would you like me to change this?
Maybe a parenthetical,
Maybe
just saying, you
it's
know,
necessary to state it at that point. It's minutes.
it's true.
Something that died, then maybe we just leave that out and let it take care of itself where it isn't.
And we take the whole that whole comment out?
Well, since it was voided by the next thing later on.
Right.
Yeah, then I'll take that whole paragraph out. Okay.
Anything else?
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second by Ms. Willis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. 2 abstentions.
Okay. Then let's hear the application from Mary and Joel Jeffries, 115 Cooper Avenue.
Yeah. This should be quick. If you want a chair, there's an extra chair over here.
So this house isn't going to have a garage.
That's a new responsibility of the vice chair from now going forward.
That's right. We're writing it in the
They're going to need a variance.
It really is.
And earn my keep.
I don't think so.
Thank you for hearing us before we get back to the Lackawanna project. I'm feeling that people in this room are hopefully not here on this application.
Is your, Mr. Trembulak, is your mic on?
Now it is.
Perfect.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank
So,
you.
This is a minor subdivision application with no variances. My clients own 115 Cooper Avenue. Property to the rear is 118 Bellevue Avenue, which is a very large lot, approximately 9/10 of an acre. It's also a rather unusual L-shaped lot. And what we're looking to do with this application is to essentially sever or cut off the L from 118 Bellevue and attach that piece of property to my client's property at 115 Cooper Avenue. Reason for doing this is, as you'll hear, is simply to expand the rear yard, which, although my client's property is fairly large, they have a substantial front yard, and the house is situated towards the rear of the property, and they have a very small yard, which they're looking to expand by acquiring this piece of property to the rear. They have no intention of constructing any new structures on the lot or removing the existing structures or any of the trees on the property. We've submitted an application, a subdivision map prepared by Richard Hingos. I believe the planning department has reviewed that and confirmed that the subdivision plan is fully conforming and that no variances are required. So I intend this evening simply to present some brief testimony from one of my clients to give you a little background as to why they're seeking your approval for this subdivision. So I would call as my first witness and only witness, Joel Jeffrey.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm a testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Your witness, counsel.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, are you one of the owners of property located at 115 Cooper Avenue?
I am.
All right. And do you own that property with your wife, Mary, who's sitting to your right?
We do.
And when did you acquire that property?
In 2006.
And you lived in the house continuously since then?
Yes,
Okay. And you live in that house with your family?
we do.
Okay. How many children do you have, and what are their ages?
We have 2 girls, 13 and 8.
Okay. And have you entered into an agreement with the owners of 118 Bellevue Avenue to purchase a portion of their property subject to this granting subdivision approval?
Yes, we have.
And you've reviewed the subdivision map that I just mentioned a few minutes ago?
Yes,
And does that map correctly or accurately depict the portion of the property that you're seeking to sever from 118 Bellevue and attach it to your property on Cooper Avenue?
It does.
Okay. Can you just explain to the board why it is you're hoping to acquire this property?
Sure. So we live on a section of Cooper Avenue that's got a bend in it, and our house is very far set back from the street. So we have a nice sized front yard, but our backyard is quite small. And we've always wanted and thought about having additional land. It's come up in ideas when we've thought about potentially moving at some point, but we just really love where we live. So when our neighbors put their house up for sale and this became an option for us, we inquired about buying it, and really essentially just to have a larger backyard and really nothing else.
Okay. Do you have any plans to add anything to what's currently there on the piece of property?
No, at this point we do not.
Okay. And you have an existing garage on your property, and this piece of property that you're hoping to acquire also has a garage, correct?
Correct.
Do you intend to keep those structures in place?
We intend to move our existing garage over, still within not needing any variances, a little farther over just to open the backyard up a little bit more to the new piece of property. But otherwise, we intend to have the two buildings still.
Okay. Do you have any plans to remove any of the trees on the property you're seeking to acquire?
The only trees we would look to remove are the ones, there's a power line that runs directly along the property line, and there's trees that's right underneath that. We would remove some of those, again, to open it up into that new parcel of property, but otherwise we don't have any intention to remove any other trees.
Okay. I think I asked this already, but do you have any intention to erect any new structures on that property?
No, we do not.
Okay. So your purpose is really to just add space so that you have a more useful, if you will, rear yard
Correct.
for your family.
Yes.
Is that correct? No further questions.
Questions from the board?
Yes, one question. Does the lot that remains when the L is removed from it, does it still meet the minimum lot size?
Oh, yes, it's still, I mean, it's 9/10 of an acre currently, and the lot would, in its reduced size, would still be 28,507 square feet, which I think is about 6/10 of an acre.
Thank you.
Still probably the largest lot in the neighborhood, even after this piece is severed.
Thank you.
Does allowing this prevent future subdivision activity in that spot for other properties? In other words, could they conceivably attach this to another lot next to it, build another house? This is for you, Counselor.
Oh, I mean, I think that goes to...
Turn his mic on.
I think that goes to, you have to weigh that out based on the way it looks. I mean, could they? Sure. If you would allow them to do that in a separate future subdivision.
They'd have to, but there's houses on the adjoining lots.
Yeah, but
They'd have to purchase those lots.
I'm saying, if you look at the plan, they're just detaching it from one and attaching it to the other. So,
Just asking about future options.
And it's a landlocked parcel, so it would need substantial variances in order to...
Worst case scenario, it's trading the option from one property to another.
Right.
But worst case.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Really, all we're doing is redrawing the line and making my clients the L-shaped property as opposed to Bellevue Avenue being the L-shaped property, but nothing else, as you've heard my client testify, will really change except for where the line is drawn separating these two lots.
What is your intended use of the garage that you're acquiring?
At this point, we're not really sure. I mean, certainly some storage space for us. You know, we have 2 kids in there, some play space as well, potentially some play space for myself as well, but really nothing else.
So I have a question. Currently, there's a long driveway that goes from the street all the way back into that garage. It's paved, I guess. Is it paved? Do you intend to turn that into grass?
Yeah, the section that we would acquire, I think there is a piece of asphalt we would like to keep that's also in our backyard. We don't have, it's completely slanted back towards Cooper Avenue, so there's no flat surface on our existing lot now. In the piece of land we're acquiring, there is some flat blacktop there that we might like to keep to potentially put a basketball hoop or something like that for our kids to play on. So I think in general, some of that driveway we'd like to take out and put grass down, but potentially keep some of the asphalt closer to the driveway.
So the other house then will continue to have an asphalt driveway that doesn't really lead to anything. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
So there's been no discussion about removing that driveway
On,
on the part of the person who's selling you this lot?
to my knowledge, no.
In that lot, I think it may have already been mentioned that 118 Bellevue is either currently on the market or
Right.
is going to go on the market, so
So it's going to have a driveway that goes to nothing,
I'm
basically?
assuming that people keep it.
Yeah, yeah.
They might realize it goes to nothing
Right.
and rather have green space. but
Right.
We don't know.
I mean, it'd be nice if, at this point, since the transaction is happening, or might happen, it'd be nice to say that we'll take away the asphalt and put grass there. But I guess that's not you. You can't, yeah, that doesn't have, yeah, it doesn't have a garage. All right. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Jeffrey, if you do remove trees, you'll follow the Montclair tree ordinance?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, I think we would actually have people come in and look at all the trees that are there existing to make sure, because there are some large ones there, just to make sure that they're safe since our kids would be back there.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions from the board? Any questions from the public concerning the testimony? Please come forward.
Hi there. Hi. I'm a neighbor, 109 Cooper Avenue, and my name is Martha Jane, better known as Mimi Weaver. And Joel and Mary are two houses away. We're all very good friends, and I only welcome some change in that back area because it really has been neglected for the years that I have lived on Cooper Avenue since 1985. So it will be a welcome change. I will say, Joel and Mary, that garage does need to be tended to periodically, the outside, just from nature and things happening. Things do happen, and roofs have been repaired and the windows have been repaired. And I also just ask that, as we have already talked, and look forward to being able to address those wires and trees, because we have had no help over the years from PSE or from FiOS, and it's a really big issue of how wild it is back there. So I think a lot of Cooper Avenue, with our backyards touching that back area, will welcome a change. But I also ask that we always be mindful of noise and lights, as I had explained, that outdoor lights sometimes people just become invasive into other people's backyards. So I welcome a new change. Again, my yard backs up to where the garage, that old, it was once a stable, is.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, Mr. Tremulek.
Again, Mr. Chair, as I indicated in my opening, it's a conforming subdivision with no variances, which I think the board is essentially required to approve under legal authorities, and I think there's no reason not to approve this application. The property is not changing except the ownership of this piece of land to the rear of my client's current property.
All right. I agree with Mr. Tremulek. We don't have an option, and I can't see any detriment as to what's been presented to us. So I'd like to move that we approve the applicant's application.
And seconded.
By Mr. Gilmer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Very much,
Tremulek.
and thank you again for hearing us.
All right. Good luck. All right. Now, back to Lackawanna, the main event, so to speak. Good evening, Counselor. Tony, we will bid you good evening. Good to see you too.
Bye-bye. Nice to see you. Hope to see you again this year.
Was that like a timeout chair or what? Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Good evening.
So, this evening I know we have the continuation of objector presentations and as well as public comment, hopefully in conjunction with our application. We did want to ask, Mr. Chairman, your indulgence, if possible, based upon objector testimony that was presented at the last evening. We were here, both from a consultant on behalf of the HPC as well as Mr. Greenbaum and Mr. Reimnitz. Wanted to see if we can indulge before we move to the remainder of objector testimony and the public comment, if we could just do a 5-minute rebuttal and just show two things. We think it'll answer some of the issues that were raised at the last hearing and may inform and shorten, hopefully, some of the questions or comments that may come thereafter.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you on?
We're on, so I'll bring it closer.
Yeah, maybe you might want to repeat that.
Sure. So, with that being said, we just to reiterate, the last time we heard objector testimony, some from the HPC's consultant, as well, Mr. Connolly, as well as from Mr. Greenbaum and Mr. Reimnitz. We would like to ask Mr. Chairman, your and the board's indulgence, if we could offer 5 minutes of rebuttal before we continue on with objector testimony, just to respond to two issues that came up during that testimony. And we would ask to do this in that what will be said and what will be shown, we think may hopefully shorten and or at least resolve potentially additional questions or comments that may come thereafter on the same issues.
All right.
With that, he's already been sworn in, but we'd ask Mr. Stolar to come forward.
You've been sworn in?
Don't have to redo? No redo? I promise it'll be brief, only a phone, no iPad. So, Bruce, Stevie, our architect, is going to put up a couple of screens, just two. There were really two things that we felt that we wanted to respond to from the presentation that was made last time. The first one, and after a year of before this board, and as everybody knows, a few years before that, the first comment really was surprising to me, but it keeps coming up, which has to do with the pedestrian access. And whether we don't have pedestrian access, we have good access, we have bad access. It's an important issue for everybody in Montclair. It's an important issue for future potential food store. We are working very hard to produce. And it's a personally important issue in my world of advocacy that I work on, which I've mentioned and I won't keep repeating it. So we wanted to just put up this slide and to show everybody how we really designed the pedestrian access for the site. And I think the first thing I want to point out is it's not just to walk here, it's how you walk here and what you're walking through. And interestingly, tonight, I hadn't noticed, but I don't know, town, which department did it, but there's an alleyway that actually goes right to my building, I see 363 Bloomfield, that was just paved. So Janice, you probably know that, and you probably had some hand in that. And I guess lights are going to follow, and it's actually an access way that can take somebody right across Lackawanna Plaza, right through the pedestrian connector that is on the western side of the slide that I'm pointing to, that's up on the wall, that everybody can see, that goes out to Lackawanna Plaza.
Can I ask you a question? Did you say that your firm did that, or
No,
was
no,
that
no,
that
it
was
just-
a town?
the town did it.
thing? Okay.
It's our property.
Okay.
It's town
Okay. Got it.
property. It just literally runs right in front of our building. And the owner, Stephen Plofker, had to reorient his parking lot and create some bollards so you can walk right from Willow. And hopefully eventually when the Glen Ridge parking lot is built, you'll be able to walk, I think, all the way. So there's that. That's one. And then anybody who lives to the west, you can see how the green lines follow, and there's some tags there that nobody can see, but it says Western Access. And then the second one,
Just too small.
do you have a laser? Or maybe I'll just go up and point. That'd be better. Do and I don't. I think it's disappearing into the... no, neither one of them work. If I can get the mic to work, I'll just walk up there. Why is the mic not working?
This one works. I turned it on.
Which one?
The right button?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, James. So the one I was talking about was right over here that I'm pointing to now, which gives people access. We're actually cutting through the building, so you'll be able to walk right through from the western side. This is not very consistent. I don't know why this is not so easy.
There you go. It's up there.
Okay, there we go. So you'll be able to walk right from here. Then this is the whole western side that I was just referencing for people who live here. There really aren't any residences, I don't think, directly on Glen Ridge between these two streets. But if you live here, there are apartments. Or if you live right here, you can come this way or you can come this way. Well, if you live right here, we're right here. There's the access either way in. And then off Bloomfield, we have two. One on the western side and one on the eastern side. And here you can come right through the plaza. And again, you don't have to go in the parking lot, which is a huge pet peeve. The New Jersey Bike Walk Coalition that I'm involved with, that we have with so many parking lots and so many shopping centers in New Jersey. It's not a safe experience. It's not a great experience. If you're getting out of a car, it is what it is, and you're expecting it. But if you're walking there, so this is a sidewalk. This is a sidewalk. And then for the folks to the east, you can come here. You cross over a controlled intersection, which the county is doing new lights here, as we all have heard. And then you can either go down what used to be the stairs that have been abandoned, or there's a handicap ramp right in this area right here. So we have these 5 ways in that we think accommodate a lot of people, and it was noted last time in the presentation that we have very poor pedestrian access, and I would frankly challenge somebody to show me a project that has better or more significant. And then the only other point we had, and we said this will be brief, so I will, is that we think our plan is accommodative and inclusive and collaborative as to the historical elements. We were accused of ignoring it and a lot of other things. So we wanted to have one rendering done that kind of shows what the front is going to be like. I think if you go there today and you look at the front on Bloomfield Avenue, it's not exactly representation of an historical edifice or facade. If you go inside and you walk around, there's been a lot of discussion about how nice the light is and the glass, which of course was added in the 1980s. But we think this shows everybody and anybody who walks by that there must have been something special here. And then if you add to it, and by the way, we're keeping 74, where'd you go? 74 of the stanchions in place, and we're relocating 8. In fact, the bus stop on Bloomfield Avenue is made out of the same exact stanchions. So only 16 are not being used. And we think that this really shows that we're creating that market feel, but in a way that a food store can still work with, in a way that will meet modern food store design, have this outside area as produce there during the warm weather. It won't be there today, on a day like today, but at least the facade has a historical feel and look. And we just wanted to make that note because we think in the presentation last week, it was perhaps presented in a way as if this wouldn't look like this. So that's really all I had to say.
Mr. Troutner, the first exhibit's going to be marked A53, and then the second one's going to be marked A54.
Great, thank you.
And you and I had a sidebar before the start of tonight's meeting. Oh, sorry. I'm usually loud enough. We had a sidebar about the exhibits. I think you should present a list to Janice of what you think the exhibits are in the file that we have not marked yet that you intend to move into evidence.
Sure.
And we're going to cooperate on that. You don't really have. I don't want you reading them all on the record. I think we can just accept the list.
That works. So there, we can do that offline and not waste everybody in the room's time.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, good.
All right. Mr. Abaki, I think the floor is yours now. You will need to be sworn in. I don't believe you've been sworn in prior to this.
No, I have not.
Do you have your presentation there?
Before we, the slides that were just testified to, are they marked into evidence?
Yes, A53 was the pedestrian, and the
Okay.
A54 is the rendering.
I would do it before, but I wanted to finish. Yeah. And what are we going to mark Mr. Rubaki's, wait, what are we going to mark Mr. Rubaki's PowerPoint in as?
02? 02?
We've only had one?
I only have one, so I have this as 02.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Spell your full name, say your full name, spell your last name.
Frank Rubacki, R-U-B-A-C-K-Y.
All right.
Okay, and first of all, can the board see this screen? Fine.
Mr. Abaki, before you proceed with your presentation, I'd just like you to put on the record what the qualifications are, experience, education, and such in making this presentation to the board.
Sure. I am a 50-year resident of 50-plus year resident of Montclair. My focus tonight is really to talk about three areas which I believe I can contribute with facts and experience and personal knowledge. The three areas are historic preservation, parking, and retail. As far as historic preservation is concerned, I've served 6 years on Montclair's Historic Preservation Commission. From a retail point of view, I have 20 years of executive experience in the retail industry, and most recently as a senior vice president for Federated Department Stores, also known as Macy's. And parking, I have some practical parking experience working for Kent State University for a short period of time. Plus, I have participated and reviewed documents concerning the master plan, redevelopment plans, and various applications, parking studies, and have spoken before the planning board, the Board of Adjustment, and the council on these issues with specific recommendations and presentations.
Okay. We're not I'm not qualifying.
I wasn't sure where that was going.
Well, I just wanted to, because I don't know whether we can actually qualify him as a particular expert, but by virtue of Mr. Rubaki's experience, I do think that he does have at least some level of expertise. I think it's up to the board to decide whatever that may be. And I also wanted to frame his testimony to us this evening, in terms of the basis that he's presenting it from. And Mr. Rubaki has not requested to be qualified as a particular expert, so I wasn't going to go there.
Okay.
If there's, do you have
I guess maybe I should hear what he has to say, and I may object if it wanders into things that only an expert can testify as to.
Okay. Please proceed.
Is this on? Now is it on? Can you hear me?
Sounds like it.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. The first area I want to concentrate on is historic preservation. I think it is really the gist of the application and the primary focal point. Just from terminology, because we have had some semantics issues in the past. These are three terms or phrases that I'm going to use tonight, and this is what I mean by them. The original train station site is the site that Lackawanna Plaza commercial is on, and then there's a portion of the east parcel that comprise the train station, not the entire east parcel. The train station, again, is the west parcel, and the existing structure as existed in 1972 when it was designated, and the historic columns are really the columns, the freestanding columns supporting the roofs, canopies, etc., over the passenger platforms, stairways, concourse, as well as the building south canopy. And the building I refer to as the terminal building south canopy. This all started back in 1972, actually before that. This screen? You want to take that slide?
Try and get everybody to see it. Good enough, thank you.
Is that better?
Does that work? Yep.
This was the original development plan, or an image from the original development plan for the train station. And what you're looking at, is this the?
Yeah.
Press the red dot.
Unless the battery's out. No, this is it.
I'll just turn off here.
Hey, it happens.
Okay. Here's the west parcel we're talking about tonight. As you can see, there's a rather narrow high-rise building here on the corner of Bloomfield and Grove Street, and the rest of it is surface parking. It was also going to be funded by the federal government to a large extent. I think the question that's probably most important is, why did we preserve the train station? The applicant's attorney was very good in sparking or focusing me, and he made two comments. One, that he thought that the train station was preserved, might have been preserved because of, to save some money. And then he also referred to it as a conversion. And I just want to make sure I address those 2 points, but this is where it came from. So starting back in 1972, the community pushed back hard as far as demolishing the train station and all the structures with it. They got a designation, both state and federal, the following year. The redevelopment agency came in and basically said, we object seriously and we're going to sue. A lot of back and forth negotiations. It became academic when the recession hit in 1973 and $5 million in federal funding went away. So the project went away. A couple of things happened since then. As you can see, a couple of federal laws went into effect that actually helped preservation. You can see there one of them was the Tax Reform Act, which accelerated depreciation on property. Also in 1976, Montclair's Planning Board certified the Urban Renewal Plan. The train service discontinued about 5 years later. And then the real big point was in 1983, the Planning Board sat and reviewed a $12.3 million project to rehabilitate the station. And as part of that, $1.3 million in federal money, an urban renewal action grant, was used to do this, and $500,000 in town funding. And just for the record, Lackawanna Plaza opened in 1985. Lackawanna Plaza opened in 1985. These are a couple of sections from the opening of the Secretary of the Interior's 1983 Standards for Rehabilitation. I put these in the presentation to emphasize a couple of points. I've taken the liberty of setting them in bold here. And what you'll see here is that from the Secretary of Interior's standards, the materials and feature are the primary importance. There's no escaping that. They're very clear in this. And the next point that followed it was that it had to be protected to the greatest extent possible. I mean, that's pretty straightforward as far as what the federal government viewed as far as preservation and rehabilitation. The other part was that the portions of the property must be preserved in the process of rehabilitation. And to accomplish this, they had to meet all 10 of the Secretary's requirements for rehabilitation. Okay, so that happens. We finish the project, and this is what happens afterwards, just to give you a sense of what historic preservation has been in Montclair, what it's meant in Montclair. We adopted an ordinance about 10 years, less than 10 years later. The council expanded the historic district, and this was the wording in the nomination report, that the historic and individually significant Lackawanna Plaza and DL&W Railroad Station were going to form the anchor. Pick and Prince came along and did a pretty good rehabilitation of the interior of the station and opened. Each one of the councils from like 2004 on took a shot at putting their mark on the HP ordinance we had, including this last council. But they kept all the key provisions that we're going to probably talk about tonight in place. And that same month, actually, the end of 2012, the mayor shared his vision of what he saw for Lackawanna Plaza. We had some follow-up visioning workshop goals when it was a redevelopment plan, and this was a section you'll see here from the draft goal, which is again to preserve and adaptively reuse the historic features and structures on site. The planning board jumped in 2016 and approved the new historic preservation element of our master plan, our vision, our policy for land use in the town. And along with that, the Montclair Historic Preservation Commission updated, broadened, and did a very comprehensive historic design guideline rewrite, which they issued in 2016. Okay, so let's get back to the Lackawanna Plaza plan. I don't have an exhibit number for this, so I can't reference it. So do we all agree what I'm talking about, which was the...
Depends on which one. It's been
The-
revised.
The 1983 been
Oh, the
revised?
83 one. Oh.
Yes.
No.
That would be a neat trick. Do you? Is it, I can proceed without it if it's okay
Yeah.
with the board.
I think you should just proceed.
Okay. So we have some confusion tonight. We've had some confusion before on this. This application started in December of 2017. Okay. The Lackawanna Plaza plan, the 83 plan, has never been included in it through the beginning of that application through to the first planning board meeting, as far as I can tell, and it was never presented to the Historic Preservation Commission for review. In August, the applicant had a historic preservation expert testify. In his report and testimony, he references 5 sheets from the drawings, or 5 sheets, and that in his report he references that the drawings were previously submitted. I can't find a record of them being previously submitted.
Actually, I'm going to object. They're actually on the Montclair Planning Board's website. I believe Janice uploaded them.
Which one? The Bedford?
He's talking about the construction drawings from the 1983.
Could I just correct you, though? I'm doing a chronology, so I'm in August. I haven't gotten to December yet.
Sheet A, AR 103, you could look at it on the website right now.
It was put on in December.
So?
That's when it was put on the website.
So? It was introduced by evidence by Mr. Bedford.
Are you arguing with me, or are you objecting, or are you questioning?
I'm objecting, and
okay.
And what you're saying is disingenuous, so.
No, it's actually quite accurate.
No, it's not, Doc.
Okay, all right. So we have an objection to the accuracy. I think at one point or another, our records will reflect who's right and who's wrong. So why don't we just continue?
Yes, you did cite it in the August 26th meeting. You made reference to it.
Yes, and an exhibit was put in at the same time.
Moving on. In November, the chair reiterated his request for an inventory of historic elements and the 1983 additions. In December, the Lackawanna plan was submitted as part of the application as testified by the architect, Mr. Stevie, and it was posted on the website under the December 3rd filings, and that's where it's currently located on the website. At the December 17th meeting, the council testified that sheet AR 103 shows the existing historic column inventory and their locations. Okay, so what does the plan show? One of the key things the plan shows is the extent, the full extent of the preservation, the rehabilitation, the repairs in kind that was required of this rehabilitation. This was, if you shouldn't read it, but if you do, you will see page after page about notations about replacing clear-story glass, about replacing bricks, about cleaning, about the types of cleaning allowed, how to restore certain parts of the bricks and structures. It also shows 106 columns. 100 columns, original columns, plus 3 1983 columns, and 3 columns that are on the terminal building south canopy. And as we all know, the applicant's testimony has been that there are only 98 columns. So
I think you may be mixing apples and oranges in terms of the platform canopies versus, I think you're talking about terminal building, but it's probably relevant.
I defined my terms in the beginning, so if there's any contradiction, I'm just going by the definition of my terms in the beginning.
Your terms, correct.
And at the bottom of this, I also noted on the 1983 plans where I drew this information from the sheets. These are the locations. This is a illustration. This is not part of the 1983 plans. It's not part of the application package. It is something that I drew up just to give you a sense of the relationship of where the columns are. And I'll just Again, this is Lackawanna Plaza side. This is the concourse over here where they have 13 columns supporting that concourse roof with the Spanish tile, you might know. And then on the Grove Street side, where there's a wall in which the east-west shed platforms and retail area are flow from right to left on this diagram. What I've done is kind of broken it up for ease of understanding that there are 43 columns that comprise what is described as the retail area and concourse area. That there are 13 columns that comprise the front of the supermarket that you saw a rendering of before from the applicant. And the pink area is the remaining shed area that's going to be demolished and converted to a parking lot. I am, to this day, confused what's happening here between the connection between these two. And I don't think it's terribly important to this presentation, but I just pointed out just for the record. Okay, one of the things I think we all agree is the terminal building, the station building itself with the waiting room, the ticketing area, and the storage is the jewel of the site. Doesn't mean that the other parts of the site are not important and historic, but this is an architectural statement, this building. I show this because this is from the 1983 rehabilitation and how much they wanted to retain and restore the north elevation of what we're looking at of this building, which you'll see I took out a section description here of item 17, which is the center door section, and how they wanted it removed, repaired, and replaced so that it was considered rehabilitated. And they even went to the level of how many coats of polyurethane should go on it, okay? They indicated in other places, other repairs, or where they were going to block things up. This is an overhead view, again, part of the 1983 plans that show the enclosure they designed for around the north face. This enclosure was intended to enclose it as a single tenant so it would be the Pig and Prince space as we currently see it today, plus a little bit more over here. But essentially it's the Pig and Prince space. And the idea was to leave this open and these openings here so that they could protect the north wall and they could maintain the north wall. So the eastern storefront this is the one that faces onto the parking lot, and it lines to the building's facade right here. That's the 1983 modern storefront, and it aligns the facade. The north wall openings are in the red, as I pointed out. This is another overhead of the terminal building. You notice two things. One is there's a skylight that connects the canopy on the terminal building. Here's the terminal building. Here's the canopy for the terminal building that turns the corner. And this is the train shed that it connects to. So you have a skylight that runs almost a length, and it aligns just past the second column. There's a bracket here that supports the roof, and it goes just past that second column from the right. Here's an interesting picture of the interior of Pig and Prince from 2012. You notice the indentation of the mural. I don't know the distance there. It's not 3 inches and it's not 2 feet. It's somewhere in between, which raises a question as far as whether this was blocked up or whether they just covered the existing doorway. I don't think anybody really knows here what is there. Okay, so 2019, just to recap, they wanted to demolish the attached storefronts. I'm not sure about the skylight above. Don't know. And when I talk about the storefronts, I'm talking about the storefronts on the Lackawanna Plaza side of the building and the storefronts on the parking lot side of the building that are actually part of an enclosed lobby or atrium. So they want to replace the east storefront with a new storefront that's set back. It's getting a little technical, I apologize, but it brings up the issue of how they're going to align it to the terminal building. And it aligns, as far as I can tell, aligns to that first canopy support bracket that I talked about. And then they're going to take the west storefront, which is the Lackawanna Plaza storefront, and the plan is to put a new but the same angled configuration, creating that asymmetrical facade of the retail side on the Lackawanna Plaza concourse. Here's an image of it. So here's the existing Pig and Prince. This is currently storage space. It's not rented to a tenant by contract. It's used for storage. As I understood the plan, which is not on the website, so I couldn't work with it, this is, the blue area is where the 1,800 square foot fast food space will be, the tenant will be, and it will open up onto the parking lot, the Lackawanna parking lot. This needs to be adjusted and pushed back to the bracket so that it matches the drawing that they presented in the December 17th meeting. So this wall has to disappear.
Mr. Beck, I have a question for you, just so I'm following this. The blue area, is that the area that has historical skylights in it?
Well, yes. There, what's not drawn is the skylight.
So the existing right now are...
Here's the skylight. Here's the 1983 skylight added, drawn on the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sheet A8 from the applicant's architectural set. And there is no indication of a skylight here.
When they do their work, but right now there's a skylight.
It exists.
It exists, okay.
Okay. And this area, I'm not sure what its use will be. It's allocated space-wise to the restaurant, the Pig and Prince. What do I do? That's not good. I got to talk faster.
Got to reset it. We're 20.
We have to do an update. Does anybody want to take a break? It's doing an update to the operating system.
Yeah, let's take a break. Let's do a 5-10 minute break.
As well.
Yeah.
will take their seat, please, so we can proceed. Okay, Mr. Rabacki.
Okay. Returning to our slide showing the north facade, the north side of the terminal building. A lot of these openings are now blocked up. According to this plan, these openings remain. Okay, so now let's get to some of the preservation issues. First issue is interpreting the prior preservation events and actions and how do they apply to the historic determination here. First point is Secretary of Interior certifies urban renewal plans involving federal money, make sure they meet all the preservation and rehabilitation standards. Montclair accepts the money. Local, I'm not sure about the state quantity, but the federal urban renewal funding as an acknowledgement that the structures have been rehabilitated, would be rehabilitated and maintained historically. I believe the events from 1994 to 2016 have reaffirmed, not reduced the scope in any way of the historic elements covered by the historic designation, and also replicating the enclosure of the terminal building's north facade tenant space, the fast food space, and not subject to protection right now under our HP ordinance, risk the loss of the north facade's existing historic fabric from future alterations. Okay. So I want to be clear, right now it's enclosed, that fast food space that Pig and Prince is using for storage, and therefore it doesn't come under the historic preservation ordinance in Montclair. Okay, second set of issues. Let's talk about our ordinance itself. One, our governing bodies foresaw the chance that there might be some confusion, so they put in a rules of interpretation clause, and essentially layperson's understanding of that clause says we should interpret the ordinance very liberally in favor of historic preservation. The standards for review, section 6 and 10 here under 137B. Deteriorated architectural features shall be repaired rather than replaced whenever possible. You'll use, if you need replacements, basically it says you should do it replacements in kind or as close as possible. So you replace it with a similar type of cement, if not the exact cement, or something that looks very close to that, the cement that was used before. And that's essentially what these two sections mean. The last point, though, is important again to that north side, and they did do this in the 1983 plan, and that was if you're going to make alterations and additions, do it in a sympathetic way so that maybe in 2019 somebody might want to remove that 1983 alteration and restore it, or maybe not, and maybe they want to replace it with a new updated storefront. So those are the three important clauses from my point of view on the ordinance. Okay, issue 3. This is again deals with that north facade, but our historic design guidelines address this, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, but essentially we have policy, background material, and guidelines that say that we should treat additions in a way that respects the original condition and tries to preserve the rehabilitation and the intent of that rehabilitation. Okay? Let's get to the parking lot, the reason why we're having this fight. Okay, I'll go straight to the issues with the applicant's plan. Okay, they're using a way of calculating, they're calculating their parking demand, the need for parking, not capacity, the need for parking based on what's called a fine dining restaurant use, which I agree with. Pig and Prince is a fine dining restaurant. There's no doubt about it. But our ordinance says right now they only need 73 spaces for the Pig and Prince that exists right now. What this new parking plan they're coming up with is saying, no, we're going to do better. We're going to do better than 73 the town requires, and everybody complains about the parking requirements of this town. We're going to do 106 spaces on weekdays and 117 spaces on weekends. Okay? And that, another way of looking at it is the demand of the spaces per seats. And that's really more for the planning board's point of view, which is a ratio that is below the requirement for a bar. A bar requires 1 space for every 2 seats. Their parking is less than that. So I guess maybe Pig and Prince might be a full-fledged 100% bar at some point. I don't know. I'm speculating. That's opinion. But the bottom line is that it's 45 to 60% more than what our ordinance currently requires. And that is compared to all the other uses in this plan. So we have fast food restaurant, we have retail, we have supermarket, office, that are all, when you combine them together, 30% less than what the town requires. They're asking for a variance, effectively that's 30% less, and they have a good reason to ask for it. They have a shared parking plan. But why go the other way just for the fine dining and restaurant use? Okay? Now we get into the demand calculation, which is community shopping center. And a community shopping center is basically has a range of uses. It can have a supermarket. It tends to have an anchor or 2 or 3 and some smaller stores that go with it. And that's what they're using for this parking demand projection. They're just saying there's going to be a range of uses in there, and we're just going to put it under one thing. However, the whole argument, as everybody is fully aware of, is that this is about a supermarket. We want a supermarket. We need a supermarket. It's a food does it. And there is a supermarket demand schedule to be used. They didn't want to use that. Okay. And that was the key point in the variance for demolishing the train sheds and for the front yard parking variance request.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I just want to state for the record, it's sounding like Mr. Rabacki is offering expert parking testimony, but I think it's been established he hasn't asked to be qualified as an expert. I would object to him being qualified as an expert. And then to the extent that this is characterizing prior testimony, I guess I don't want to waste a lot of time, but my objection would be that I don't know that I agree that this is accurately characterizing the testimony of the applicant's parking expert or the board's parking experts.
I'll skip the slide if the board
want to waste a lot of
wants.
time.
Do you want me to skip this slide?
And the prior slide.
Not a chance.
Same objection, but.
Okay, I can.
Don't you think that you should be asking him what he's basing? Because he's basically reciting what appears to be not an opinion, but the facts as he understands them. So, isn't that a question for you to? Isn't that something that you'd want to deal with on cross?
I can deal with it on cross, but I just want
But
to
it's
know the objection.
objectionable on because what's the basis of the objection?
Well, I believe he's recharacterizing testimony by both the applicant's traffic expert, parking expert, as well as the board's parking expert, and I can go through it on cross, but what I'm struggling with, Mr. Chairman, is that there's been extensive, we've been here for a lot of hearings, testimony on this, the board's heard it, the public's had the opportunity to ask questions of these professionals that come up, and then now I have an unqualified member of the public presenting an objection, recharacterizing everything that's been said, and now the onus is on me to cross-examine him to reestablish all the points where he's diverging from what was actually said, which was already, thoroughly vetted and cross-examined.
Are there facts up here that? He's reciting an understanding of the facts, but is he misquoting the facts?
Mr. Chairman, honestly, I don't know that I might even need to bring my own expert back up to get into this fine dining restaurant use on this slide, and on the following slide, if you could put it up, Mr. Rebecki.
I'll concede the following slide and just not show it. Let's skip it.
Oh, because I really didn't understand where you were going with the fine dining being more, but the others being less. I mean,
I'm skipping this one, I'm skipping the next one.
But you asked the rhetorical question, why did they have more for fine dining than our ordinance required? And I'm concerned what you think the answer is there.
Or what significance it has. I mean, isn't the point, isn't it?
That would ask me to draw a conclusion, which I will gladly draw if you want.
Well, if you're just saying that if it appears that that's more than what requires, then fine, we can leave it at that. I'm not sure.
No, well, I'm interested in your conclusion.
It's inconsistent with the shared parking plan variance. What? It's inconsistent with the basis for the shared parking plan variance. If you ask for a variance based on shared use of spaces to reduce the obligation against requirement, but then you take a single use and you don't increase it slightly. You don't increase it. You increase it by those type of numbers, 45 to 60.
Counsel, do you agree that that's what that's what the testimony has shown?
No. I think I might even need my expert back up, but I believe there are specific requirements under ULI shared parking methodology, which we followed and which the board's consultant agreed with. I realize that maybe what's happening is he's isolating specific numbers and then drawing conclusions or attempting to draw conclusions based on where numbers show as being 45 to 60% more as if we were just doing a straight line parking calculation with no shared parking versus same issue with where there's less parking. But I don't know that, I don't agree that that is the appropriate way to evaluate this as compared to the ULI shared parking methodology, which has been testified.
Did you take the ULI shared parking methodology into consideration when you were reciting, your figures, or do you contend that it doesn't apply?
I took the parking experts' reports. This information is from the parking experts' reports, the town website, as far as the ordinances that are required. And I've made notations as far as what numbers I'm using. There are before, mode, and time of day adjustments. It's an apple to apples comparison. This is the requirement. On page XX of the parking report is the base factor that clearly can be verified for weekdays and weekends. And then if the planning board decides to accept variations for time of day or for mode, then those numbers would be adjusted, whether it's a regular application for a variance request, straightforward, not this one, or whether this one where they're using a shared parking approach. But
so doesn't this come down to us, the board, looking at the reports from your experts and looking at what Mr. Rebecki has put forth with respect to those reports, and for us to really determine whether we agree with it or don't agree with it?
At the end of the day, I agree, Mr. Chairman.
But why would we need more testimony about it from your parking expert?
Well, because in part I don't understand what he's saying, but to the extent he's saying that what my guy said is wrong.
Yeah, he's disagreeing. I mean, clearly he's disagreeing.
Right.
He's not up here to agree with you.
Right.
He's opposition.
I guess what I'm saying, what I'm concerned about the absurdity of this process is I don't believe he's qualified to talk about this. I'm not qualified to offer shared parking testimony, so then we have to hear from the experts.
But we've heard from the experts already. Okay, we've got your report, Mr. Rebecki. We've heard your experts' qualifications. Mr. Rebecki is testifying. You've heard his qualifications on the record, and basically, I think Mr. Rebecki is counting on the logic of his argument. Okay, isn't that up to us as the board to determine whether or not we buy his logic or whether we buy your expert's logic? Because just because your experts say it, it doesn't mean that it's fact. We don't have to accept what your experts say. If we disagree and we think that there's reasonable grounds to disagree, we can. So I don't know, I'm trying not to waste any more time, and I'd like to move on with this. But I think at the end of the day, he's trying to present information to us with a certain amount of logic to it. If you have questions like I've just asked him, I think you'd be better served to do that, to illustrate where you think the weaknesses are in his analysis or such. But I don't necessarily see a basis for an objection to him, giving you this logical explanation of basically the information that you've provided. So, Mr. Rabaki, can we continue, please?
Yes. The next area I want to focus on is the parking capacity. How many spaces, how we count spaces, whether they're used or not. The first issue is I think the board needs to address the parking plan counting passenger drop-off pickup spaces towards self-park capacity. It makes no sense to me because we've already made a mode adjustment that says 80% of the people, or in whatever category, 75%, are going to drive into the lot and count towards self-park capacity, and 20% are going to arrive by other means. And passenger drop-off and pickup would be other means, so you can't count that towards self-park capacity. It's kind of... Any objection?
Okay.
I object to all of this, but that's all right. Keep going.
That's okay. I have to thank you. And then the other thing is, as the board knows, there was a concern on the board's part about the high turnover spaces that they were looking for as far as order pickup spaces. The applicant had suggested there might be 2 in the Lackawanna Plaza lot, and that there would be 2 more in the main lot on the west parcel. And I think those are good ideas. However, I also think that the parking capacity should be credited for those high turnover spaces. If they're by definition high turnover spaces, the order pickup spaces turn faster. There are third-party delivery providers, Uber Eats, DoorDash, that act as customer order consolidators, so there's less demand. The third-party delivery models minimize standing time. They're not incented to waste time and sit around. I would suggest a time increment approach as far as what the expectation might be, or whatever numbers are available, whether it's 2 to 1 for 30-minute turnover to 4 to 1. In other words, the space turns every 15 minutes.
To what point, Mr. Rabaki? What are you trying to say? Based on...
I'm saying I want to increase the parking capacity of the west main lot because it's more efficient land use.
You want to?
Yes.
Okay.
Based on operational issues, right?
It's not the number of spaces I'm increasing the capacity for the same amount of land. If I can park 200 cars on an acre, or I can park 400 cars on that same acre, that's more advantageous to the residents of Montclair, that we're using less acreage to park more cars. That's my concept. Okay? It's like a parking deck. Just think of it as a parking deck. Rather go up than go out. Surface park it. Is it a known detriment? Is it acknowledged detriment? Okay. I think the board needs to address the LP valet, the Lackawanna Plaza valet service locations, offering hours, waiting times. Both experts have testified, one expert testified that both experts agreed to cut back the LP service time from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays.
I think it's 8 p.m.
Excuse me?
Oh, it's 8 a.m., isn't it?
The 8 a.m. I'm not concerned.
Oh, okay.
Yes, 8 a.m. is the start. They're going to, instead of staying open till 7 p.m., they only want to stay open to 6 p.m. as far as the stipulation in the approval. The medical office use has no seasonality for all intents and purposes. I think logically you would know that, but I'll tell you the ITE and others would back me up on that one because you put it into your parking reports. You have 36,000, the plan has 36,000 of Lackawanna Plaza facing uses. The medical office, the concourse retail, the fine dining and restaurant uses. This results in peak parking demands in the 6 and 7 p.m. weekday and the 8 to 9 that are far greater than the capacity of the Lackawanna Plaza lot. From a retailing point of view, the applicant has insisted and argued strenuously, and I agree with them, that front entrance parking is a requirement of big box retailers. It is a requirement of shopping centers. I can testify to that because I'm an expert in retail. You're to put this much demand with the parking supply behind a retailer is not good retail site location. It's horrible site location. So one way or the other, you have to figure out a way to satisfy either you satisfy the demand in some way so that it mitigates the backyard parking to the retailer, the backside parking, or you change the retail orientation. I don't know, you have to do something, but you're not going to have successful retail if this plan goes forward like this. And I'm not even counting the 6,700 square feet that's already, in my opinion, dead space that's caught between the supermarket and the office building lobby. That is about as dead as you can make it from a retail point of view, and I don't even know how you're going to sign it. It's just going to be horrible. So that brings it up to 42,700 square feet of problems. Okay, alternative parking plan. Basically, I came up with a pro forma. It's an idea that essentially says X amount of parking of certain types, certain locations, utilizing valet, results in a certain amount of demand that is similar to what the applicant is proposing. The similar capacity is very similar to what the applicant is proposing. But the bottom line is, whether the alternative or the applicant's plan, you have excess capacity. And that's what the applicant is asking you to approve, is to approve a capacity that's above what's required by their own shared parking analysis.
So, Mr. Rabacki, are you saying that the parking lots don't need to be as big as they are?
Exactly. They don't need to be as big, or you have to, or you could say, I don't trust these numbers that I'm hearing and I want extra parking. That's a policy decision, but as far as the numbers are concerned, you have to do that knowingly that you're asking for more parking than what the parking numbers show you need.
So you don't have a problem with the parking variance?
I don't have a problem with parking variance.
Okay.
I've never had a problem. I don't have a problem with development. I just want, anyway, the important thing is really the notes, which are hard to read because of the angle of the screen, but they bear emphasizing. All the demand projections that you're seeing include a 5 to 10% buffer already in them for people to drive around to find spaces. Maybe we miscalculated. Maybe different times of the year some things will happen, special events. So there's 5 to 10%. On a demand of 450 spaces, that's 45 extra parking spaces on the upside. It's a lot of extra parking.
Mr. Rabacki, to continue with the chair's line of thought here, are you saying that the applicant is asking for too much parking for the site plan proposed, and therefore he doesn't need to knock down some of the stanchions that have been requested, that he is seeking too much of a modification to the historic elements of the site? Is that what you're arguing here indirectly?
That question towards at the end of the app. I'd like to get through the slides, and then could I come back to that?
Please continue.
Okay, and these numbers, the applicant's numbers and the alternate scenario, both use the fine dining demand factor that's in the experts agreed on. It excludes the 3 passenger drop-off pickup spots from both sides because you can't count that. It's on some park. There's no capacity credit for the high turnover spaces. I just left it as a 1-to-1. It reflects the valet powers. What I did do is I did think the LP lot, the Lackawanna Plaza lot, could have fit 6 cars, no problem, valet style, based on the Pro Park styling. So I said, Okay, let's be fair, go from 4 to 6. We all agree the capacity shortfall is going to be made up by these parcel. And then when we get down to the bottom line, we have the excess capacity down here, these numbers here. And then we still have the 5 to 10% buffer on top of that. Okay? So I came up with an alternative lot arrangement to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. This is the historic layout. It's a north-south orientation facing the terminals. Here's a better picture of it. By the way, the reason why it was done that way is because you had horses with carriages, so that's why you didn't have traditional parking stalls. This is a applicant's view, overhead view of the parking lot, I believe from 11/15/2018. This is my idea with a pedestrian circulation. This goes to pedestrian safety. The blue aisles, blue areas are pedestrian areas. No cars, pedestrians. What this idea, this concept works on is that pedestrians can get out of their cars, connect with the perimeter through crosswalks and pedestrian-only areas that are dedicated straight through. They're not blocked by other cars here. They have markings where they have dedicated areas. And they can do that here, 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 here. So, and essentially I'm assuming that there will be access to the sidewalk from these spaces. So from a pedestrian point of view, there's not a parking lot in town that offers these kind of features as far as pedestrian safeties. This is well ahead of any parking lot in town, any large parking lot in town. Okay, we talked about the pedestrian movements entering the site, and one of the key issues has been access from Grove Street, specifically north from Glen Ridge Avenue and further north. You come down. I chose to get rid of the stairs because they're a recreation. They weren't historic. So I maintained the ramp. But somebody coming down through this ramp, this handicap accessible ramp, could walk straight through to the other side to go to the Pig and Prince, retail, wherever they want to go, without going all the way around this way or all the way around this way. So when you talk about pedestrian circulation and safety, you have a handicap accessible pathway across the parking lot. Okay, I've added some additional little access points so that weren't here on the east side. So again, the pedestrians can get out of these sections and get some relief from the traffic in the parking lots, and I think it's very important. Here's a close-up of the sheds, where the train sheds are and the details. And this really highlights the three things that I love best about this plan. What I've shown you already was pedestrian safety. That was number 2. Number 1 is the amount of sheds and stanchions that are being this plan would allow to be saved, preserved in space. The red squares are the stanchions that would have to be demolished and the roofs with it. But you can see that you have a substantial amount versus none right now of stanchions and sheds. And this front row actually would have a shed remaining here, so the view from the street would be almost of one continuous train shed going across the lot. Another feature, and this is my third favorite feature, is the passenger drop-off area. Here you could circulate in from here, this side, or this aisle, go into the one-way. You'd have to loop around or cut across, but you enter the one-way, and you have 7 bays for either passenger drop-off or order pickup or any combination thereof. You would go through, and it's a drive-through, much like a bank, and you go exit this way and out. Just so you understand, from a retail point of view, this is one of the biggest features being added to bricks and mortars. Walmart has already outfitted 1,000 of their stores with freestanding podium-style pickup stalls. You see CVS and some people like that doing drive-through. You see other people that will be adding pickup and drop-off locations. This is going to be a major trend that the planning board, whether they agree with it here or not, is going to have to address. And how do you want that circulation to happen? Matter of fact, there's a new parking study coming out this year about that. We utilize compact car spaces. I use the township standards for the size of these spaces. Again, it's another one-way. It allows you to differentiate to the customer where they can park and where they can't park. Obviously, the handicap is very clear. Most retail customers are repeat customers. They know what kind of car they're driving. They know what their parking need is. So as you can understand, coming into this lot, if you're aware of this lot, you know that if you have a compact car, you would likely go here first. If you were getting dropped off, you go here, handicap, etc. Everything else is regular, standard size parking spaces.
Where do you have the cart carols, the cart collection areas?
These little gray boxes here, 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 and here, and here are corrals.
Okay.
Now, a cart is less than 2.5 feet wide, so they don't have to be double width, triple width. Here's a full lot view. Again, you have your dedicated train section. Here's the east-west orientation versus the north. I mean, the east-west orientation of this diagram versus the applicant's north-south orientation. You have essentially the two entrances as the applicant does. And you see the choices of how people might go through this lot and find parking, and how once they do find parking, they can get to the perimeter safely. Another feature of this lot is this area here, which is a dedicated valet storage area. It can hold up to about a dozen cars here. It has a feature where there's an entrance or exit, or there's an access drive on this side and this side to facilitate the movement of cars, the storage and the retrieval. And as you might recall from the plan, it's not here, but across from this drive aisle, this exit going across Grove Street, is an entrance to the east lot. So if there's a valet issue, the connection between the two lots offers an expedited pathway between the two.
Just a question for you. Are you suggesting that the valets will come out of the Lackawanna Plaza lot, make a left-hand turn, then make a left-hand turn onto, they're going around Glen Ridge Avenue?
Not at all.
How are they getting there?
What I'm saying from a retail point of view, what makes sense from a customer experience point of view, and that's really what's missing from the presentation, was there should be a valet offering in this lot. You have all that demand. You're forcing the customer to go behind the retail to find parking. You're forcing the customer to pass by occupied parking to get into the larger lot to find parking. From a retail experience point of view, not to have valet parking is, I don't understand it. There's not a site plan that I know of from a major retailer that would, if they were going to offer valet parking, they wouldn't offer it in the main lot. Okay? And then the other little feature was, because of the configuration, there's more green buffer here between Bloomfield Avenue, so it doesn't look as bad as it could. And by the way, there are new rules for groundwater requirements, stormwater requirements for green infrastructure currently being heard. I know it doesn't affect this application, it's just presented as an FYI. That's it.
Questions from the board?
It's hard to take this in, not having seen it beforehand. So I think I'm at a disadvantage there. I'm trying to follow what you're saying, but I do think that I've missed you along the way. I will fess up and confess my ignorance. But it seems worthwhile looking at this. I don't know.
I have a couple questions.
Right, yeah.
So just going to kind of go in order of what you presented, because that's what I wrote down here. Just to help me understand a little bit about the Secretary's stance. To what do they apply? Is it every historical building, everything that's designated a National Historic Landmark? how does the law apply to secretary standards?
They don't apply to local landmarks. They don't apply to local landmarks unless you incorporate it into your own ordinance, which we did. So on one, and I'm not a lawyer. So, but from my HP experience, it applies because it's embedded in our local ordinance, and therefore we follow it. It's also because there's federal money involved in this project, it would have to follow Secretary of Interior's standards in order to qualify for that.
Okay. So if they were
a federally designated site, which I pointed out was done in January 1973. The funding, remember, was lost. The project was scrapped. Then they came back sometime just prior to 83 and got federal funding. I'm sure it's probably between 76 and 83 as a guess, but it's a logical span. And the township also kicked in $500,000, but we didn't have an HP ordinance at that time.
Okay.
Which should be pointed out that we did all of this without an HP ordinance, without an HP commission.
Sure, that's. I'm just, again, I'm
So we
trying
did
to
all
understand this because there's been a lot of testimony of the Secretary's standards. I'm just trying to understand how they do or don't apply. You brought up that your count of the stanchions was different than the applicants. To what buckets do they fall, the difference in the numbers between being reused, redeveloped, repurposed, and just totally cleared out?
Well, again, you have to start with how many are there. And I'm saying there's 106 there. They're saying there are 98 there.
Right.
Okay.
So that difference, are you able to tell? Are they
I have a good idea where the difference is, but I didn't calculate their 98. But I could take a guess where it is. I think they didn't properly survey the 1983 plan, which they knew they had in their possession since at least August. And I think they ignored physical evidence in surveying the site. And I think they made some assumptions that are obviously turned out to be inaccurate, and that's why they have.
But do you think the difference, I guess what I'm trying to figure out, are the difference in this number of stanchions, if you can tell, and maybe you can't between the two?
Let me give you an example. This is in the appendix. This is a view of the mall interior. Okay, the circled area shows a group of 3 stanchions, 2 very close together, unreasonably close together, and 1 that seems to have like normal spacing. And then you have the rhythm of the other ones. They missed this. They counted this grouping as 1. Well, they counted 2 as 1, I think. I don't know. I'm not going to say how they counted, but they missed this. So they have they have physical evidence of what exists. They have the 1983 survey. They did their own survey, and because of that, they miscounted.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to go is, if you can tell, are the extra stanchions that you believe are there that you've counted in 1983, are they going to stay on site with the applicant's plan, or do you think that's more stanchions that are going to be demolished?
No,
if you can
actually,
tell.
from my point of view, are you talking about their plan or what my suggestion?
I would like to know both, the answer to both
Well,
questions.
I'm not sure if I can answer their plan. I think their plan is just to demolish the entire parking lot area. You know, basically leave everything except for.
Talk
and
into
I'm not
the
even
mic.
clear about the.
Talk into the mic.
Their plan is to demolish what will be the entire parking lot area. I think they're going to keep the pathmark row of stanchions in place in their settings, but I'm not clear on that. But if not, then that's another 13 that they're going to demolish. So it's hard to. I would say they're going to demolish 60 of the 103 that comprise the train structure and the 3 extra that are camping. Let's ignore the 3 other on the camping. No one's going to touch that. So effectively, we're dealing with 103 stanchions that are at risk. They're going to demolish 60.
Okay. You brought up a detail of the doorway in the 1983 plan. Was that in the Pig and Prince station?
It's the waiting room doorway to the exterior that's currently the Pig and Prince main dining room.
Okay. Did the 1983 set of plans have similar details for, say, the train sheds? You know, similar level of detail
Yes.
on number of coats of, was it varnish? I
Oh,
think
no,
it
no,
was?
no. Yes, they had a considerable number of repair requirements, restoration, treatments, and what was submitted to the planning board on December 3rd is not even a complete set. It's missing, I don't know, 24 sheets at least, something like that I know of, plus any other exhibits that would have gone with it. And this level of detail, as you know, is not normally part of an application package to the planning board.
Do you
This
have
was a
those?
planning board.
Do you have those 2
No,
dozen
I do
sheets?
not know the look. It indicates on the cover page of the 1983 set the missing sheets. They're circled. So the
Okay.
lights, that would be very interesting. What kind of light fixtures? They're not part of the package.
And then perhaps my last question, when you talk about the north facade wall, was that the wall between the proposed fast food area that's currently storage and the Pig and Prince restaurant proper?
The north facade wall of the terminal building is the wall that will be the southern wall of the fast food space and the storage area, whatever, of the Pig and Prince space, the 400.
Right, so the northern facade wall was the one that you put up the picture of the
Yes,
interior
yes,
of the Pig and Prince and noted the archway.
My point there was essentially,
Well, no, I think I understood your point. I was just trying to make sure that, because towards the end of it, I wasn't sure
No,
if
I
the
don't-
north
I
facade
don't-
wall was the same
I
one.
don't think I clarified my point enough on that one. So my point there was, right now, it's not included in the ordinance because it's enclosed. By demolishing the existing structure, it's open to interpretation whether it now is exterior or interior. And I believe, according to policy, it reverts to exterior, and the decision is up to you whether to enclose it again. Is that
Okay.
clear?
Thank you.
Going back to Mr. Braddock's question, your plan proposed, or your proposal here suggested that that some of the stanchions columns would be removed.
Yes.
So how many?
19.
Out of 19 out of the
106, 103. 19 would be removed.
removed totally, or removed and reused, or is there a
19
combination?
will be removed, and then 11 to 12 would be reused, because 4 would go to the bus shelter, 4 would go off-site to the east parcel facade, which was not part of the original train station site ever. So I consider, to me, that's like putting it up in Montclair. It's not part of the original site. And then 3 to 4, and again, I was confused, is they're going to rebuild, they're going to put in a new row of stanchions between the retail and the parking lot to support some of the sheds they're going to keep. So they're going to put sheds that were never there. They're going to put stanchions or columns, I'm sorry. They're going to put historic columns in a place that they never were. They're going to give a second set of columns. They're going to be a mirror set. Do you want to see where those are?
Yeah, I'd like to see what you're talking about.
Okay. Okay. So here's the retail area. Essentially, this stays the same.
Where's the Pathmark store?
Along the top.
Are the sheds that are illustrated in gray along that top row, do those reflect the stanchions that go along the front of the Pathmark?
Currently, yes.
Currently? So the back part of those, where would the opening, if you can use the pointer to be specific, where would the opening to the Pathmark be? Along what line? That line, the front
opening
line,
would
the
be
back
where the-
line,
yeah, where
or
the
along
stanch-
the middle?
Where the columns are.
So in the middle, the
Yes.
opening would be along the middle.
Yes.
Okay, and so where are where are now you saying that they're going to put stanchions that no longer?
Right here, the green ones.
Just those 4?
No, those are just 4 of 6. They're going to put 2 here.
Okay, okay. But the ones that are along the front of the path, Mark, are remaining intact, based on your understanding?
My understanding is from the latest testimony, I think they're going to leave the stanchions in their footings from 1983, from 1913. They're not going to change the footings, not going to change anything.
So the ones that are, the 4 that are along that side, aren't those already there?
No.
They've been removed already?
No, those are the extras.
Extra to what?
They're demolishing 60. They have plenty of extras.
Right, but aren't there that's on the original layout, weren't there stanchions along there as part of the concourses?
No, they're going to, yes. Technically, these should all be connected. Back in 1913, it was all one big row.
Right.
The rain came in between it.
So they removed...
What I did was separate it for the point of illustration that in order to build this shed roof, they're going to put in a new row of columns.
So that's not where the original
roof on top.
That there weren't original stanchions in those positions.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions from the board?
I'd like to ask the question, why weren't we given this to look at prior to this meeting?
Because this was objector testimony.
Mm-hmm.
We were not supplied with it because it's basically we don't have a hard and fast policy for objector testimony. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, there was some back and forth about what this would cover.
Mm-hmm. I believe I stayed within the...
Yeah.
About what was originally submitted and our discussions about, yes.
Yeah, I just feel disadvantaged not having.
Well, don't feel disadvantaged
before. It
because
doesn't because I
don't feel disadvantaged. I mean, we have time.
I don't feel like I can ask questions to Mr. Rabacki without having absorbed all of this information, after reading it rather than just hearing it.
Well, we may have to look at this. And this is something that the board is going to have to determine. And we may have to ask questions. I mean, we've had 12 months worth of testimony, more or less, on this, that we may have to go back and ask questions on. So
I just want to be sure that will be the opportunity to do that.
May happen.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And,
he's been here for most of it.
And it may not be just in Mr. Rabacki who we need to ask questions on.
Specifically, Mr. Rabacki, because he's made some interesting points here.
We may have to go back and ask questions about other witnesses too. There's an overwhelming amount of information here. Any other questions at this point?
I just wanted to ask a simple question. Given the diagram that you have up on the screen, how many stanchions are you showing there? Are you showing 100 and some, or is that what you're...
I'm showing 106 stanchions.
Okay. And my understanding is that...
As far as their original locations, not the applicant's planned. This is a original location.
Is it true that in 1983 that there were some stanchions that are added that are not original? And where are they?
This one and this one.
Which one?
The ones without the shed roofs on top, they have roofs on top. I just left them off because to distinguish between original 1913 and 1983. It's this one without a roof, this one without a roof, and this one without a roof.
That's the location.
Okay. And are you saying that all of the ones in pink are to be completely removed from the by the present demolition plan, or are they part of what would be used as light posts or whatever? The number of
they're going to restore a bunch as various serving various looks, and basically it's an homage. They're going to do an homage that the council asked for to historic preservation. So they're going to restore things. What the blue ones, to help you out, the blue ones here, this row, this row, this row, this row, this blue one, this green one, this green one.
I see pink. I don't know what you're talking about up there.
I'm sorry. I'm talking about the historic columns. The historic columns are the little boxes. Unfortunately, from a PowerPoint presentation, I can't, I could have done bigger. But the columns are these little boxes here. These are green columns here. I know it's hard to tell from that angle. This is blue here, blue, but basically it's one row, skip to another row. These are the ones they're putting back in as freestanding tributes to what was there. These red boxes, these red column spaces are going away.
Okay.
They're just going away. And then they're going to take these columns that are going away and they're going to throw 4 out to the east parcel they'll use on the apartment building for a face. They're going to take 4 and put them out on Bloomfield Avenue to use for a bus stop. They're going to take 4 here. They're going to take 2 here, put 2 here. And I'm probably forgetting.
Okay, Mr. Rybacki? Mr. Rybacki, I'd like to help both the board and the audience with some takeaways from what you've asked here. Is it, I'll come back to what I said before, is it your contention by deduction, by logical deduction, that the applicant is asking for too much parking for the site, for the amount of square footage at this location, and that they don't need to be doing that, and you have presented a potential alternative plan that does not require as much parking and maintains more of the stanchions than they are proposing? Is that a takeaway from your presentation?
Thank you. No, what I'm saying is I think the parking variance is the parking difference. I don't want to call it a variance in this context. I don't think the parking difference is that substantially different. I mean, I'm at 452, 456 demand on 459 capacity. They're at 452, 456 on 467. So we're not substantially different from a demand and a capacity point of view.
Okay.
It's how we use the demand and how we use the capacity. And one of the things that...
Okay, please hold on here. Are you saying that their calculations are incorrect?
No.
So then what?
I'm saying there's a different approach. They said from the very beginning, there's no other way to do this.
A different layout? Let's be specific.
They said the parking solution, we need the parking, we need the layout, this is the only way we can go.
Okay, are you saying their
I'm
layout?
saying there's another way to go.
Stop.
Are you
Specifically about layout.
Are you saying their layout is not the best for maintaining the stanchions that are there, and you've presented an alternative layout? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I think that my layout delivers historic preservation, the public good of historic preservation. I think my layout provides public safety, another public good.
So you've essentially presented an alternative parking plan layout.
I'm sorry, and I think it serves the retail customer experience much better.
Okay, so just for full clarity here, you have presented an alternative parking plan layout that, in your opinion, maintains the stanchions that their parking layout does not.
Correct.
That is the substantive difference in the approaches that you have shown today as rebuttal testimony. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, we'll get into semantics, but it's the primary, as the Interior Secretary said, the historic preservation is of primary importance to me.
Thank you, sir.
So essentially, you're still having a 375-foot length parking lot, but out with a different plan.
Well, no. I'm using the same, in my plan, one of the things you'll notice, and this view shows it, is I'm using the same 280 feet starting point that the applicant used. And I adjusted it a little bit to fit in the stanchions, but it's the same plan. The biggest one of the things that I didn't point out is I'm not using as many 300-plus football field length drive aisles.
Okay.
My drive aisles are not all short. They're 2 long ones, but the rest of them are very short drive aisles.
Mhm. Okay.
It's very dense. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it would have been
I didn't
nice
see
to have
another
read
way
this.
to-
Mhm.
I had one shot at rebuttal.
Are there any more questions from the board? Going once, going twice? For the moment. Counselor Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So actually picking up right where we left off with the stanchions. Mr. Rabacki, is it possible that... Certainly. Picking up where we just left off talking about the stanchions, Mr. Rabacki, is it possible that the deviation that you're identifying between the 98 stanchions that the applicant testified to and your number of, I think you said 106 or 103.
There are 103 that were supporting the train platform and concourse.
Is it possible that some of those stanchions are inside the structure that we've been collectively referring to as the Pig and Prince restaurant?
No.
No. And you're certain of that? How are you certain of that?
Because...
You're guessing?
No, because it's not on the 1983 plans.
Have you physically gone to the site and actually...
I've actually been in the site. I actually as you saw, I took a picture of the site.
Go ahead.
There are no...
You physically counted the measurements between all the stanchions?
Oh, no. I don't think anybody's done that.
All right, but so this is your lay interpretation of one drawing versus our expert interpretation of and testimony regarding where the stanchions are located.
Exactly.
Okay. You mentioned...
Oh, but for clarification, though, your experts used a range of definitions that I didn't follow, and I presented my definitions at the beginning of this, so it's said with the understanding that we're following my definitions.
Okay. Does that in any way change the...
No, doesn't change anything I said.
Okay. Now, Mr. Rabacki, you mentioned that you're an expert in retail. And I think you mentioned you had some working experience in Federated, or was it Macy's?
Well, it was Macy's when I joined. It switched to Federated department stores. They were bought by Federated, and then they renamed themselves Macy's.
You mentioned you were a senior vice president. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what was your
function?
What was your function as a senior vice president?
Production and quality assurance.
Production and quality assurance. What does that mean?
It basically, my responsibilities included working the supply chain from the design merchandising function back to the suppliers and supporting international sales, supporting divisional initiatives that involved Macy's private brands and private labels. Basically, I worked for the division that did all the private branding and private label product for the corporation and its subsidiaries and its outside accounts.
And in terms of the description that you just provided of your job responsibilities as senior vice president, was that the role you were in with Macy's with other job titles over the course of your 20-year career?
Similar.
Similar, okay.
Similar.
So fair to say you weren't involved in
retail
site
I
design?
wasn't 20 years at Macy's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, that was a similar role and responsibilities within Macy's.
Okay. And prior to Macy's, where did you work?
J. Crew.
J. Crew. And how long were you at J. Crew?
About 5 years.
Okay. And what was your title at J. Crew?
Various titles. I progressed from a product manager or merchant to director of sourcing for a couple of families of business.
And that's a similar job in a supply chain capacity?
It's actually more extensive because it goes from the front-end customer experience all the way back to procuring the product. Okay. We only did private brand product.
All right. And where were you employed before? So wait, so 5 years at J. Crew. How long were you at Macy's? I apologize.
Macy's was 10 years.
Okay, 10 years. So you have another 5 years.
Yeah, about 10 years.
So where were you before J. Crew? For that?
2 years at a company called Liz Claiborne.
Okay. And what did you do at Liz Claiborne?
I was the director of manufacturing for their retail division.
Okay. And other than Liz Claiborne, any other retail?
3 years at Orbex.
And what did you do at
How many
Orbex?
people remember that?
And what were your job responsibilities at Orbex?
Basically, I went from, that's how I got into the business, so I went from executive trainee, but mostly it was assistant buyer.
Okay, so fair to say your bulk of your retail experience not in retail site design of a store at a location? I'm sorry. No, as in it was not in that experience?
No, it's not fair to say.
Oh, well then, can you describe how your experience was in retail site design based on what you testified to as your bulk of your experience being in pure supply chain and product?
Oh, you're using an adjective I didn't use. I didn't say pure supply chain.
Okay, well, tell me, let me ask you a different way. How did your 20 years experience relate to retail site design?
Well, because as in retail, probably much like the supermarket business as I understand it, the merchants are considered owners of the business. They have P&L responsibility for all aspects of the business, and they get promoted or fired because of it. And the organizations are usually built around them to support them and provide services, information, and technical expertise. Site design is one of those technical expertise that merchants will use or not use. They're choosing to pursue business opportunities by location, by region, etc.
So you were...
In other words, site design was a support function. It wasn't a primary function.
Okay. Well, and how did it...
Because I was a merchant.
So you were asked to design site designs of stores while you were
No,
working
it was
there?
actually to sign off on site designs, though.
Okay.
Or choices, or layouts, or orientations. We traveled to the West Coast. Part of retail in the United States is for the merchants and for the support people too, is to be aware of your competition and to be aware of customer experience. Being aware of the competition means going out and actually visiting malls, freestanding stores, your own stores, working with operational people, regional people, to assess opportunities, whether it be in product, location, physical space, or non-physical space, internet, different channels, catalog.
Were you involved in the design of parking lots in conjunction with the retail?
No.
No. Okay. Now, do you have any experience in supermarket operations?
Not direct experience. No.
Okay. When we say not direct experience, what do you mean by that?
Well, again, retailers do a lot of working with consultants and outside parties where we learn best practices, we innovate, it's a very competitive business, and I would say most of my knowledge comes from colleagues outside of my companies, consultants, and the like. So I don't have any direct experience.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the 1983
Lackawanna
standards for Secretary of Interior for rehabilitation as being I guess you referenced those in conjunction with the 1983 development. What was the connection with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation with the 1983 development?
Federal money was used for the project.
Okay.
And it was a historic, federally designated.
So you mentioned that the project had to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation?
Had to be certified.
Okay. And so how did that relate to the stanchions that were incorporated
Prior
into the interior
testimony
wall?
from Dr. Bedford was that as a result of what your team called a conversion, I call it a rehabilitation, that it had lost its historic status. And my point there was that if the Secretary of the Interior thought that it was an appropriate rehabilitation, then by those standards, it would still be historic.
What specific information do you have that the Secretary of Interior made a determination that the stanchions were being rehabilitated as opposed to being demolished, removed, or otherwise converted, whatever words you want to use?
I don't know. Our president shut down the government, so it's kind of hard to get information out.
So you're speculating?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, besides what's in the 1983 standards themselves, and I'm making
it's
kind of like if you get a tax refund, you kind of assume you filed a tax return.
Well, I don't know if that's exactly right. So what you're saying is you read the 1983 Secretary of Interior standards. Based on your read of them, you're
Yes.
interpreting that the Secretary of Interior must have looked at the standards.
I had no legal counsel to help me.
Okay. Now you mentioned that I think you were testifying that as part of that 1983 conversion, that the Pig and Prince space was open. Was your point in bringing that up the idea that there was an attempt at historic preservation to its operational form as when it was a ticket area?
Yes.
In terms of what was that? Okay. Now, what are you aware that before it was the Pig and Prince restaurant, it was a Hollywood Video?
Yes.
Yeah. And were you ever inside the Hollywood Video?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you recall there were drop ceilings inside the Hollywood Video?
No, I don't recall specifically.
Okay.
I live 4 blocks away. So.
Okay. Now, you mentioned there are historical skylights through the Pig and Prince space, I think, running through the building?
There is a historical skylight that connects or bridges the train shed and the north wall canopy of the terminal building. There's also a skylight on the terminal building.
Is it your understanding that the applicant is doing anything to that skylight?
I'm totally confused with what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, if I told you that the plans reflect that the skylight is being left as is, does that change any of the testimony you've offered today?
No. Well, obviously I wouldn't be concerned about the skylight going away, but my testimony about the skylight goes back to the applicant, specifically the architect's prior issues with the terminal building and the northwest historic feature that got lost on a plan by accident. And that in adjusting the connection of the new storefront to the building facade itself in a different location should require close historic review, because you were going to take, according to your December 17th graphic of how you intended to do it, and the chair commented on this, was it shows a flat bracket from the terminal building supporting one part of the roof and being met by a angled bracket from a terminal column, from a train shed column, and it did not show from that view also the skylight, because that was a specific area of concern by the chair, and the reply was no, to go straight back. And also you can't tell depth-wise. There's a stanchion column in front. The south canopy, the northernmost column, has 2 supporting brackets on it, one directed east and one directed north, that helps support the canopy. It's not clear from the architect's drawing what you're doing with that support. I'm assuming it's going to stay in place, and maybe it even contains the roof line of the terminal, but it was not dealt with in detail, and you're dealing with what we all agree is historic fabric. there's no question, I believe, unless I'm misunderstanding, that the terminal is 100% historic.
Now, you had referenced section 347-137, standards of review, in conjunction with the Montclair Township Code for the historic, which are general criteria for review by the Historic Preservation Commission, and I believe you're referencing subsection B, which is rehabilitation of existing buildings, structures, objects, and sites, and reviewing an application for a certificate of appropriateness, and it goes on. The question I had was, you're looking at, are you applying that to the platform canopy remnants that have been the subject of the variety of testimony over the last many, many meetings?
Apply it to this site overall.
Okay. Is your contention that that's the correct section as opposed to subsection D, review criteria for demolition, as it applies to the?
Yes, I believe this is the correct section.
For the platform canopy remnants?
Correct.
Okay.
First of all, they're not remnants. That's your characterization. That's not an historic term.
Well, it was. All right,
it was used by your expert inappropriately.
Yes. Yeah. According to you?
Yes, according to me. Just my opinion.
Now, with respect to your calculation of parking needs, there's been testimony by applicant's expert as well as board's expert. Is it your suggestion that that the ULI parking matters approach is the correct approach, or are you implying that that analysis should be modified for the board to consider what the applicant is proposing?
I'm sorry, you're using, I'm confused by which group you use. We have the ITE, you have parking matters, and then you have what's the third one we're using in this application?
Well, I didn't mention ITE or any third one. I asked is...
no, because I don't remember parking matters being cited in the application.
But it's been cited in testimony.
I don't recall it being cited in testimony.
Well, let's...
I don't recall it.
Okay, that's fine. Well, if I was to... sorry, Mr. Calvin.
Try again. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you've offered a parking analysis. Did you rely upon ULI's parking matters in terms of offering that analysis?
No.
Okay.
I don't. No, I use ITE and the other one. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been a long night for everybody.
All right, so Mr. Rabacki, you made I'm going to use the word alternate site plan proposal, suggestion or number of suggestions this evening. Do you
I'd like to call it an illustration, yes.
An illustration, okay. Now, in terms of that preparation of that illustration, I mean, did you prepare that on your own, just by yourself?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now...
I did have feedback.
You did have feedback. Feedback by who?
Well, I got feedback on BarissaNet. I got feedback from 3 architects. I got feedback from some township officials. I got feedback from friends. I got feedback from strangers.
So let's start with the architects. What architects gave you feedback?
Yeah, I don't want to share. Well, actually, I can share it because I gave it to the head of the HPC. Mr. Rooney was one of the architects. He's on the HPC.
And what did you and Mr. Rooney talk about?
I didn't talk to him personally.
Oh, well, when you say you got feedback from Mr. Rooney, how did you get feedback from Mr. Rooney?
He had asked, the chair had asked for me to forward the plan to the members because I made a presentation and they did not have the ability to we didn't have the time to actually go through the presentation. So they asked if I would send it to them. And Mr. Rooney said, basically it was an interesting plan. I think that he thought there should be some other opportunities in the plan for emerging trends.
I'm sorry, did you say
emerging trends?
What's
retail trends? You
okay.
know,
I see.
like parking lot trends,
yeah.
obviously.
You mentioned you also got feedback from township officials. What township officials?
Janice Sally, for one.
And what feedback did you get from Ms. Talley?
She didn't think I was going to get a chance to testify.
Ah, okay. All right. All right. So your illustration, was that, did...
My illustration, yes.
The illustration. So
I liked it. Did you like it?
How did you calculate, or did you, are you contending that it's accurately calculated as far as dimensions, distances, scale?
I think it was my intention to be as accurate as I was capable of being, and I believe it's very accurate in as far as all those things. Scale.
Well, how do you have any training in terms of being able to prepare a site plan as far as having accurate dimensions, distances, scale? I'm sorry. Well, what is your basis for saying that you believe it's accurate as far as its dimensions, distances, and scales presented?
I know how to read a site plan. Okay, I'm not an expert in it, but serving on the HPC, you see a fair amount of site plans. There have been site plans provided as far as redevelopment plans and published, and I've reviewed those. I've reviewed site plans for development applications. I've also reviewed and re-reviewed and reviewed 10 more times the parking study the township conducted and all the appendices and exhibits there. What I did was I took some starting points, some landmarks and specifics from the various site plans that your expert provided. I use those as points of reference and constraints. Then I took parking spaces and I kept it as simple as that because it's just parking spaces. They're all 9 by 18. You put two of them together and it's 18 by 18 and you do this and that. It's not rocket science. It's probably the least demanding part of civil engineering from my point of view.
Okay. Did you consider contours and elevations of the land in terms of preparing the illustration?
I considered it, but matter of fact, one of the things that I thought was an advantage to my plan was that I would be able, using these sidewalks and islands and such, that these stanchions these columns could remain in their original 1913 settings based on this diagram.
How did you consider contours and elevations? I mean, you must have had a extensive amount of free time to become a site civil engineer in your spare time. I mean, isn't this a complicated field?
Are you being sarcastic?
Possibly.
Possibly. So you want to move on?
Yeah. Well, I'll ask the question in a less sarcastic way. How did you read the survey, the grading of the site, and come to determinations as to what the correct contours and elevations would be in terms of the laying out of the site and the stanchions and basically everything else on the illustration?
Well, I'm not moving the stanchions, so I relied on the original 1913 building to retain the layout of the site. I understood from previous testimony looking at the site plan and various comments from the board and other experts that there was a slope problem, an elevation change problem that permeates the site, both from south to north and from west to east. And I considered that as best I could in trying to preserve the stanchions. So that is why I put the sidewalks where I put the sidewalks and where I put the drop-off stalls where I put the drop-off arrangement of the drop-off stalls, and why I put islands around the columns in the handicap area to help address the different elevations as best I could.
So when you say as best you could, I mean, what was the analysis that you came to based on drainage patterns and other things related to the contours and the elevations as to why you reached the conclusions that you did?
Well, I started to include drainage, but the chair said I couldn't delve into anything outside the scope of preservation, parking, and retail. If you wanted me to talk about drainage, I will talk about drainage. I have some ideas there.
Fair point.
Green infrastructure. I put it on the original plan.
So, looking at the applicant's proposal, is it your contention that that's not a? If I was to offer you the contention with respect to the applicant's proposal, that is a typical conventional layout for the front of a supermarket, would you agree or disagree with that statement?
I would say it's a typical layout.
Mm-hmm. And do you consider what you've proposed as a typical layout?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Do you consider the alternative proposal, your illustration, as a typical layout for in front of a supermarket? Okay.
I think it's far superior.
You think it's far superior, but do you?
No, I base that on looking at the large super parking lots in Montclair and in Bloomfield and West Orange and surrounding towns and their layout. And I have to say that most of the layouts are pretty horrible. ShopRite being one of the worst. Acme, one of the worst. Actually, the best one I found is really King's, surprisingly. Whole Foods was not that bad. King's Upper Montclair. King's and Cedar Grove, no, it's horrible.
You have to wait for the next question.
He's taking his time. We're trying to move this along.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
See?
Are there questions from the public? You've got a couple. So, Mr. Burbaki, if you would, yeah, please. But these are questions, yes.
Good evening.
You can't have both. You can either have the mic or the lectern, but you can't have both.
Don't need.
Because I need.
Okay. Good evening. My name is William Scott. I'm the co-chair of the Montclair NAACP Housing Committee, and also I'm the chair of the Montclair NAACP Housing Committee, and the co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission, and a resident of Montclair for 69 years. My understanding at the last planning board meeting that there was going to be some presentation.
Are you going to ask Mr. Burbaki a question?
Yes, okay.
So please keep your questions directed towards Mr. Burbaki and his testimony.
Okay.
What you're asking doesn't sound like something that he can explain.
Okay, I'll get back to that then. Okay. This has been a long process, Mr. Garacki. Your testimony, well, I probably would ask the question, how many times have you testified over the last 12 months in response or opposition to this application?
I wasn't allowed to.
No. You've been to this podium and you've spoken on many occasions.
He's asked questions just like you have asked questions, and we've tried to restrict his orations to questions just as we've been doing with you, Mr. Scott. So you haven't been testifying, and he hasn't been testifying.
And he has the opportunity also to ask me. But my question was, and the reason why I posed it and framed it that way, was the fact that when he was responding to the developer's presentation of his plan, in a verbal way, he didn't have any presentations or anything of that nature, but I believe in many cases throughout that opportunities that you've taken, dozens of opportunities throughout this process, you've offered a lot of this testimony from a verbal standpoint. Tonight you made a presentation, a formal presentation, but I guess my question would be, your formal presentation, what percentage does it represent of your questions that you've asked over the last year?
I don't know. I've spent a substantial amount of time asking questions of the experts. But I think what you're missing, and the thing I've made clear at times in the past, is that this proposal, this organizing of my thoughts and additional information, remember, some of this information, a key part of this information, was not posted to the township website until December 3rd. It wasn't presented to the township until December 3rd. So when you say it's been going on for 9 months, you saw how much of my testimony revolved around the 1983 plan set. Furthermore, what I've made crystal clear at every opportunity, and I take great umbrage at this point, is that my recommendations, my proposal, will not delay this project whatsoever. It will allow for 45,000 square foot, even though I think that's grossly unrealistic, it will allow for a 45,000 square foot supermarket, and it will allow for a range of more intensive uses than are existing on site today. And what I'm proposing does not block that or obstruct that. It's the same parking lot. It's reorienting new storefronts a little bit on one side. The stanchions stay in place. Everything stays in place. So I take great umbrage to anyone that thinks that what I'm doing here is delaying Montclair's ability to get a supermarket.
Mr. Grabacki, you completely missed the point.
Well, I do that a lot.
I've missed the point of your question too.
Well,
Mr.
my
Scott.
point of the question.
So, I mean, if you're questioning the timing, I don't think the timing is something relevant. If you have a question about the content of his testimony, that's what we're here to question at this point in time.
Yes,
if you're questioning why he's bringing this up now as opposed to another date, that's something irrelevant. We've already allowed the testimony.
Well,
and it has no relevancy to whether or not, and no bearing on whether or not we accept his testimony or not, and has no bearing on us giving greater understanding to his testimony.
Your point is taken, Mr. Nguyen. My point being, how many times do you have to ask the same question?
Mr. Scott, that's not a question that you can ask.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Why not?
Because this is a proceeding where this board is making a determination. You are allowed to ask this witness questions with respect to what he has stated on testimony. You are not allowed to ask him about his motivations. You're not allowed to vent about your frustration, about repetitiveness. And believe me, Mr. Scott, if anybody in this room has grounds to vent about repetitiveness, it's the people who are sitting up here, okay?
Well,
you're here, you're being allowed to ask him questions about his testimony, and that's it. And if you have something that you want to explore with respect to what he stated this evening that you don't understand or that you think is wrong, and you want to bring out another point, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, please take your seat.
Okay. Well, and I appreciate,
because you are delaying the proceeding at this point.
In all due respect, I'll take my seat, but I believe that when we were told that the opposition was going to be given an opportunity
Mr. Scott.
Make a presentation,
Thank you.
And we're sitting here for 3 hours, I think that's a little bit more for the public to bear. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Again, this is not a matter for public opinion. It is not a matter for popularity. We are trying to receive evidence. We're trying to receive facts. We are trying to receive relevant information in order to make a decision here. And if you are not happy with the content of that testimony, that's your opinion, but it is not relevant to what we're doing here. Please proceed with caution.
I'm good. I'm okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Deirdre Malloy. I am co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission. I am also an environmental commissioner. I have a background in real estate. I've been licensed since 2000.
Well,
such and such.
We don't really need to know your background in order for you to ask a question.
Excellent. Good. My specific question is, first, can you go back to the parking plan that has the valet parking? Thank you for that. Yes. Okay. Where you have the first row of parking spaces and the main entrance, the in and out?
Here.
Yes.
First row you're talking about?
No, the one up straight in front of,
Oh, this?
right there. Including the valet parking to the right of the entrance. Can you explain to me the logistics of how traffic is supposed to flow into Bloomfield, from Bloomfield Avenue, in and out of that area, while people are backing out of parking spaces and valet parking is, you've got people going in, and depending on the weight, you're going to have a row of cars waiting for valet parking. And with that, you're going to have a stoppage that's going to back up and may or may not be in conjunction with the timing of the traffic lights. Can you explain the flow of how you see that working?
I'll be glad to. That's a good point, actually. First of all, some clarification. The applicant's plan, as far as cars departing the lot, will only be allowed to turn right. They won't be allowed to turn left. What I didn't show on this plan is there's a painted median that spans this whole entrance, so I don't expect that any left-hand cars can legally turn left-hand, make left-hand turns into the lot. So that only leaves cars coming from the right and entering the lot. I looked at the traffic counts. I don't pretend to understand them, but what I foresee is that as the cars come in here, and I didn't put them on here for the sake of clarity, but you don't see any stop lines. There would be stop lines logically here and here, and this would be a free flow drive aisle. So they would come in and they would turn left or they turn right, and they would go to their destinations. If they wanted compact parking, they go here. If they were being dropped off, they would go here. If they're handicapped, they go here and here, et cetera, et cetera. As far as the parking is concerned, this green area is angled a little bit to the right side because, quite frankly, a car backing out here is going to go back into this drive aisle. And this car would likely go across and then out. But this is a very common arrangement. As a matter of fact, if you look at the applicant's plan, specifically the inside parking underneath the apartment building, they're more challenging angles and possible conflicts than what I see with this particular one. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no.
What would make you feel more comfortable about, because they also have a center entrance. The difference is their center entrance here goes up to an aisle location approximately here. So you have all the tens and tens of cars, whatever number that is, and you have the tens and tens of cars from whatever there's, and they're all meeting in this area of their plan. I see it. That's one of the reasons I did this way, is because it distributes the flow better, in my opinion, from a user point of view, versus their plan that had a conflict of everybody converging at a right angle right here. I can show you on their plan if you have a moment. See, so their plan, just so you understand, their plan has their cars coming here, and this is a long drive aisle, so they could just go straight through at speed if they choose. I don't know what the speed limit is in the parking lot. And then you have these people coming in here. So they're all converging in this one quadrant. And you have these three other quadrants of parking. So you see the advantages that I'm trying to, okay.
In my opinion.
Questions?
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Further questions?
Of Mr. Rabaki?
Of Mr. Rabaki? Yep. Well, do you have questions or not?
No, public comment.
No, we're not dealing with public comment, and in fact, we're not going to get to public comment this evening. How are we going to do? Are you prepared to stay here until 1 o'clock in the morning? Are we cutting off people? Who are we going to cut off? It's 10:30 right now. Who are we going to cut off? That's the problem. We're going to come back to public comment at the next meeting. We're going to start public comment at the next. Who do I allow to go this evening, and then tell the rest of them that they've got to come back?
They line up. They line up.
Let's come back to this. Let's finish with questions.
There's no more questions of Mr. Rabaki, Mr. Chairman.
We
My name is Richard Southwick. I'm an architect at Beyer Blinder Bell, New York, and I have a question about the.
I'm sorry, Mr. Southwick, could you state your address?
350 Route 513, Califon, New Jersey.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Southwick's actually not a Montclair resident, so I'm going to object, but I already think I know what the answer is, but just stating it for the record.
He's asking a question.
The question is about the funding from the 1980s, the Federal Action Grant, and I'm a little confused about if federal monies were accepted for the improvements that took place in the 1980s. My understanding is that
You're asking a question. Who you're asking that question of?
it was on one of the slides.
Okay.
So
Mr. Rabaki, was there federal money in this process?
Yeah, that's the first question. And once federal money is accepted, and I thought that was your statement, doesn't it protect in perpetuity the historic fabric that was part of the improvement from the 1980s? So I'm wondering how there could in fact be proposed demolition to allow either your parking design or anyone else's parking design rather than keeping the train sheds intact.
I would have to make a case for the demolition to the appropriate reviewing board.
Which means you would need a certificate of appropriateness from the HPC?
No, not under Montclair ordinance. The planning board access the HPC and development applications.
Does the historic preservation element of the master plan reflect the secretary standards?
Yes.
Right.
And the ordinance reflects.
The ordinance does as well. So
more importantly.
So I don't understand. Yeah. So I don't understand how demolition could actually take place based on the foundation of the historic preservation element.
It ideally it shouldn't, but as a resident of Montclair for 50 years and understanding the process and the chairs seeking possible compromise solutions of prior objecting witnesses, I wanted to propose something that one would meet not completely, but a much further part of that. And I also wanted to respect the township's need for a supermarket.
Okay, one last question then. As a historic preservation expert, how can you then justify the amount of demolition, which is by all definitions an adverse effect and would never be allowed for demolition?
Quite frankly, if I was sitting on the HBC and an application of this type came before me, I would not allow the demolition. I would not allow the re-implementation of the storefront against the north facade. I would keep that open so that it falls completely under the historic preservation ordinance. I would do a lot of things different if I was sitting on that side.
Thank you. No further questions.
I have a question though. Isn't in light of what?
Just a member of the public asking a question.
No, I understand that, but he's raised a point. From a legal point of view, since the project has received federal funds, I think he was making the point that we shouldn't be able to tear down the historic fabric, including the stanchions. So
no, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
I thought that's you shouldn't be the person talking.
I'm asking our lawyer.
No, the lawyer doesn't have the answer. Mr. Troutner may have the answer. Why don't you explain it to us?
Yeah, well, my understanding is well, it's not even my understanding. There is no federal funds involved in the application that's before this board, so it's a
He's
non-issue.
suggesting that there were federal funds in the building in 1983.
And that the obligations go in perpetuity.
That's not my, well, one, I don't have any confirmation federal funds were involved in 1983, and two, it's not my understanding that that would preclude, well, it's a couple suppositions there, but we've already, it's our contention that the historic integrity of the stanchions was lost as a result of what was done in 1983, but beyond that, it is our understanding legally that there is no, it doesn't become like a deed restriction in perpetuity, then the interior mall can never be modified or demolished.
I was told there were no federal funds in the project at some point in this process. But I don't know what the effect is from 1980.
Mr. Abaki, what's your position on this? You were about to state with respect to the impact of the prior use of the funds? With respect to it causing in perpetuity preservation?
My point was mirroring both, that I believe that the 1983 taking of the funds, accepting the funds under the conditions present at that time, had the township formally acknowledged the historic nature and the scope of the project, as the planning board approved the plan. By doing so, it was an ipso facto, whatever you want to call it, recognition of the historic nature of the rehabilitation, number one. Number two, there are no federal funds involved in this project, so therefore federal law doesn't preclude you from demolishing an historic landmark.
So the answer to the question was the fact that they were used in 83 doesn't preclude demolition in 2019?
No.
Okay.
But what it does do, let me clarify, what it does do is it requires anyone approving demolition to acknowledge that they are demolishing historic fabric.
Okay.
You
So
can't say it's not historic and then approve it demolition. You can't go there.
I understand. Personally, I need further clarification on this issue because I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what the requirement is now, but it's an issue that has been raised. There are different positions on that issue. We will need to clarify that along with a lot of other things before we make a decision on this.
And would you include demolishing the existing storefront and what happens between that and the application to put in a new storefront, as far as historic preservation law goes?
Well,
I'm just asking you to clarify.
We would have to evaluate the applicant's, whatever their ultimate plan is, and if it includes that.
Well, that would be presented.
Right, but the plan keeps
Might
evolving.
change.
Okay, so
fair enough.
whatever the final plan is, if there are proposals to changes, then we would have to evaluate that.
Am I done?
Oh, excuse me? Might not?
Am I done?
Oh, are you? I'm asking, are you done? You have anything else to say? You're done?
Give me a mic, open mic night.
No. Not open mic.
Want to do stormwaters?
No.
I was going to see if we needed a sheriff's officer to take you through the parking lot.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rabbi.
Thank you.
All right. So, how many people want to be heard in public comment? Could you raise your hands? As I suspected, there's quite a few of you. And I don't see how I can limit who talks this evening and who has to come back at the next meeting. We're not going to be able to finish this at this meeting. And I don't think that it's fair from our standpoint, too, to have to listen to your public comment in a bifurcated fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more useful for us to hear everything all at once so that we can get that piece of this puzzle as a whole. So At this point, our next meeting is in 2 weeks, and that's the 28th. All right, so, yes, sir, you have a question?
Yes, excuse me, sir, just 2 points.
Okay, go ahead.
Under delivery, at the last meeting, you said this presentation was going to be 15 minutes. You were going to give us a cassette player to Ms. Talley. You were going to evaluate and get it to everybody else. Then you said we were going to have thing. But I think the presentation was more than 15 minutes. I think that's kind of unfair. That's all.
Sir, I cannot predict how the question and answering session is going to go. We're trying to give everybody fair opportunity to be heard. We're trying to give also everybody fair opportunity, particularly the applicant, fair opportunity to question, all right? We have members who make promises and don't keep them. I'll put it that way. You know, with respect to the timing, you know, I think I've tried to make it clear for months now that we are, to an extent, playing this by ear, while we anticipate, based on certain representations that are made to us, what's going to come in. People like to minimize and downplay what they have to say, and it very often comes out in a fashion that we could not anticipate. Now, and I understand that it's inconvenient, but it's something that I have no control over. We could very easily say, okay, everybody gets a minute to get up and say what they need to say. I don't think that would be fair to the public. I don't think that would be fair to anybody who's involved with this. Again, we are trying to give everybody fair opportunity to be heard. Even at our next meeting, if there are so many people here who want to be heard, you know, I may have to put a limit on how much they are able to say, but I guarantee you it'll be more than a minute. We're trying to conduct the process in as fair a manner as we can, and I really can't say anything more than that. Yes, Mr. Scott.
Is going to be dedicated to public comment. I think all the individuals who came out tonight to participate, that would be their opportunity, and they would look forward to that. As the gentleman just indicated, we were under a great impression that this presentation is going to be about 10 to 15 minutes. And, you know, we absolutely should reach out to all communities to make sure that they're aware of the process and to come out and speak and make a comment in the public comment. But my point is, if you're going to indicate the next meeting is going to be dedicated to public comment, then we can absolutely understand that that's going to be our opportunity to speak.
Counselor, with respect to this public comment portion that we're on the eve of, are you intending to present any rebuttal testimony?
No, Mr. Chairman. I think we're ready to proceed into public comment and then summation thereafter.
Okay. So that would be the only question. If the applicant is intending to present rebuttal, then, you know, at this point, it appears that we will be proceeding with public comment.
Mr. Chairman,
and I'll qualify that by saying that there may be something that arises between now and that next meeting that this board feels that it needs to consider in order to allow due process to occur. And if that's the case, we will detour before we get to the public comment. But as much as I can predict at this point in time, that's how we intend to proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you said that, because the only qualification I would give was there was a comment about accepting of federal funds, and I don't anticipate, or I hope we're not going to need to bring anybody on that, but
I don't think we really need to bring somebody in for you to testify. I think we can investigate what legally is applicable and make that determination.
Yeah, why can't you give me a 2-page memo on that?
That's what I'm hoping
for. Double check whatever funds were in the past, and then tell me why you feel
But we'll look into that independently ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I already have. I already did do some research, and I was convinced that we were okay because I was told there were no federal funds. I didn't consider that there were federal funds in what occurred in 1980, so that part I'd have to take a look at, and I'm hoping for a shortcut rather than have me do a lot of work on it.
Well, it helps if you tell us what you're relying on, and that will help expedite our evaluation.
John, I have a question. Is it appropriate to ask the applicant who might have seen this presentation prior to tonight? Did you?
No.
Oh, you didn't see that? Okay.
You haven't been disadvantaged any more than anybody else.
Well, I'm
has.
just wondering if they have any comments that we should know about now before we start.
Well,
looking at
that's
this.
why I asked if there was going to be rebuttal.
So there's
And
nothing you have to say about what you've just seen.
Unless they change their parking arrangement.
There's,
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that we disagree with, which I could hit in my summation, but there's no need to bring an additional witness.
Okay. All right. Then.
Is it possible that those of us who have stayed throughout this meeting in anticipation of public comment can sign up to speak at the next meeting?
What do you mean, so that you get preference to talk ahead of people who maybe weren't here? Is that because, I mean, everybody who comes at the next meeting, I fully intend to let be heard.
I think a sign-up sheet would probably go a long way to make this a fair process.
I don't have an objection to people signing up and letting us know exactly how many people are going to be heard. But, if people show up who haven't signed up, they're going to be heard too. And, in consideration of your patience, we can start a list this evening, and, you'll go in the order that's on the list. Yes, ma'am.
I'd also like to ask or request that, since this public comment has been delayed so much, would you please consider accepting some written testimony?
We can't by law. That the law does not allow us to accept written testimony rather, and to consider that as part of our deliberations.
There's someone here that drove from Washington, D.C. to comment tonight for HBC, and she at least present tonight.
Why? Well, is this somebody who was? Is this someone who was scheduled? Who was supposed? Because I got one inquiry from the HPC about a witness, and we advised the HPC that they wouldn't be able to testify.
I think that was the gentleman that came up who had the
He asked a
the
question.
other address.
He asked a question
of Mr. Rabacki.
But we weren't accepting testimony. And yeah. And this is somebody who, why would we listen to someone who hasn't been a part of the hearings, who's not a part of the community?
As you know, Mr. Chairman, under the section G, E, or F, any board member is able to put up evidence or testimony that they believe is in support of the particular hearing, and so we could hear from someone under any of those bylaw sections, but I'm not clear what the person they're referring to is actually going to testify to. Perhaps you could state what, since it's been so last second, you could state what exactly they want to present, and the chair could then make a determination, since it's somebody new.
Because what we are trying to eliminate at this point is repetitive and redundant testimony, and we're also trying to limit the input, and I know we have made some exceptions, but we're trying to limit the input as much as possible to people who have ties to the community. Because we're not accepting testimony from anywhere in the country, if some, that is just being flown in just to comment on this.
Well, there's an urban planner, Leslie Crean, who is available to
Come up to the mic, please.
Leslie Crean is here from Washington, D.C. She's an urban planner who would like to give objections to applicant's testimony that the sheds cannot be used to house a supermarket.
Okay, so we've heard testimony on that, on both sides of that. So that falls into the category of repetitiveness.
But
and number one, why should we listen to her? She's not from Montclair.
Well,
she's not even from the state.
She's a professional planner who is giving a planning perspective.
But why should she be entitled to come here and give a planning perspective?
Because I think that was missing from some of the earlier conversations.
Who thinks that that was missing? Who? You personally, or are you saying, are you making a representation on behalf of the HPC, or exactly what? Because my answer is going to depend on what you tell me.
Well, I invited her. I'm on the HPC. It's not an official HPC invitation, but she's here, and she's very knowledgeable, and she has some information that would be interesting and useful to
But
share.
we're not out to get information that's interesting. We're out to get information that's relative. Okay,
I believe it's
relevant,
relevant.
rather, to what we're hearing. And again, I mean, is she going to testify to something that we haven't heard before?
I believe she is.
Like what?
Well, she's right here.
No. Like what? What's your belief based on? I don't think you have a belief. I don't think you can really tell me what. Mr. Greenbaum.
Yes.
You don't have the floor.
Let Mr. Greenbaum speak.
If I may, please.
If you may what?
Just make a comment, please.
No, I don't want to. I don't want to hear a comment. We're trying. We have a specific request.
The request is to have a planner look at this from a broader contextual point of view as it relates to the effect of detriment of the town.
We've already heard testimony, a lot of testimony on that topic on both sides of the fence over the past 12 months.
I'm not sure.
Are you going to, and I have out of trouble envisioning that you're going to tell us something that we haven't heard.
I can't speak for somebody else's voice.
Then you shouldn't be up here talking to us then, because you're not going to give that testimony. You're talking about somebody else giving that testimony, and if you can't speak for another person, then bye.
I think we would like to have a planner speak to counter representations made by a planner.
Who is we?
Members of the community.
Is this HPC?
No.
This seems like HPC.
Can I ask you about doing this by the HPC?
No.
Well, I recommend that
Steve,
someone
but it
make a motion
appears.
to close the meeting and carry the case. Oh, sorry.
Well, we can close the case. We can close the case for the evening. No, we're not allowing any comments from someone out of state. We're not allowing any comments from out of state. That's it. Thank you. No, we're not.
She can come back at the next meeting and you can make.
No, I won't. No, I'm not even going to make that promise because again, I don't necessarily see ties to the community. This is a public comment section. This is not testimony. This is public comment. Public is Montclair. Public is not anywhere in the United States. All right, not for the purposes of this hearing.
Beg your pardon, sir?
No, I'm sorry.
That's a violation
No,
of the
I'm
First
sorry.
Amendment.
I'm sorry. We're done. We're done.
You can be done, but
no. If you have a problem,
then I
if you have a
registered
problem,
a
appeal
legal
it. If you have a
objection,
problem,
maybe
appeal
I
it. But
will.
we're done. We are done. Please, madam,
suggest
step
that you-
away from the microphone.
I suggest
Step
you consult with
away
your
from the
counsel.
microphone. I suggest that you go to law school. So you.
Sorry, you want to attack me personally
No,
without
I don't
knowing
want to attack
anything
you
about
personally.
me
You're
or what I
telling me
was
that it's a
going to say.
violation
Be
of the
very
First
careful,
Amendment.
sir.
You're not an attorney, all right? I'm an attorney.
You know
and I'm
nothing
telling
about
you
me.
that you are not permitted to speak, and it's not a violation.
You know nothing
it's not a
about me
violation
or my
of First Amendment.
qualifications.
Bye. Goodbye. Good evening.
Nothing.
Good evening.
I strongly recommend
Good
you
evening.
consult with your
Good evening. Then you can go out in the parking lot. You can no. This isn't a popularity. As I told you at the top of this meeting, this is a judicial proceeding, all right? We have rules that we need to follow. We are subject to appeal by the applicant if the applicant feels that we have abused those rules and can prove that. And I'm trying to preserve the integrity of this hearing. this is not a popularity contest. This is not a council meeting where everybody gets up in order to say, this is a judicial proceeding, okay? We are making a judicial determination at the end of this that can be appealed into a court of law, all right? So we have procedures that the municipal land use law requires us to proceed, and it's not a popularity contest. It's not based upon applause. It's not based upon public opinion. It's based upon what the law permits us to do and what the law does not permit us to do. All right? And that determination falls on this board. So, we're concluded for the evening. Thank you.
Did we make a motion? Did I miss it? Did we make a motion to carry without the notice to
January 28th.
Oh.
We're carrying it to January 28th.
And if anybody wants to
With no further notice?
With no further notice.
You want me to sign up? If anybody wants to sign up,
Bingo.
Folks, Miss Talley over here on your right has the list if you'd like to sign up. Mr. Galvin?
I said it earlier. If they didn't listen to it, they can play it back on the recording.
To the board, we need a motion and a second to make that carry. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Troutner,
Aye.
do you waive the time in which the board has to act?
Yes.
Okay. And you're going to provide me that memo in a couple days, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
we have
We
one
still
more,
have-
we have
we
one
still
more
have business
item.
we need to finish.
Do we have to pay bills?
We still have business we need to finish.
Do it next time?
Just for a minute.
That's okay. You
What's
guys
that?
Pay bills next time?
Oh, we can. Why don't we just do it now? No, we moved to carry the hearing for Lackawanna to the next meeting, and council agreed.
Gotcha. Okay, just
Right, everybody, we still have business to conduct as a board. I'd ask that you step outside, please.
How are you? Coming to meetings now? See what's going on, huh?
So
we have bills.
we have bills.
I have no objections to the bills, and seeing no other objections, I would move to approve the bills.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Janice, one more question. Will you Will you send around Rebecca's presentation?
Yes.
Will Mr. Rebecki submit his presentation to you, Janice,
need a
and you'll
copy.
circulate it to the board or put it on the website, please?
I have his presentation on my laptop.
And send it around.
And I'll send it around to everybody.
We need a copy of it.
I just have one more. I have another question. What happened with the Haynes redevelopment going to the council?
The council has, the Economic Development Committee is going to be discussing it at their meeting on Friday, and it's up for, I think, vote at the January 22nd council meeting. Okay, that's important, January 22nd.
January 22nd, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Nope.
ask.
I think we're all set.
Okay.
Will you contact the new engineer to tell them?
Absolutely, they'll be here. They'll be here. It's the news I like to talk, to spread, yes. And everybody, this is Tom's last meeting.
Is it? You're not,
You need to be here for
I
public
thought.
comment.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Tom. On behalf of the board, it's been great having you
Stay on
here.
a couple more meetings until we were done.
He's doing inspections.
Oh, okay.
He'll handle.
And I think we have a few other questions, too, that we're going to have.
Nothing new.
So we need another meeting.
On behalf of the board, thank you, Tom, for your many years of service. Thank you.
Retirement.
Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you, everyone.
Hi.
So do you think that